Good afternoon. We would like to welcome you to this Provo Municipal Council work session. Appreciate your patience while we moved downstairs to have better accommodations for all of you who have taken an interest in this matter. We appreciate your attendance today. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube channel 17, which is different than our normal channel for work meetings, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphone is in the room, will pick up the noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the microphones can pick up side conversations. That's mostly for our benefit up here. Looks like, let's begin with the roll call then. Mr. Strachan.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
David Harding.
Gary Winterton.
Kim Santiago.
Dave Connect.
George Stewart.
Kay Van Buren.
Dave Sewell.
Wayne Parker.
Thank you. The opening prayer will be offered by Dixon Holmes.
Our dear kind Heavenly Father, we're thankful to be in this public setting this day and with our elected officials and those from our community that are interested in the issues before them for our great city of Provo. And we are thankful for the blessings that Thou hast bestowed upon us individually and collectively as a community, for the many opportunities that we enjoy. Help us to remember those that are less fortunate, that we might lift their burdens and help them to attain things that are important to them. We pray that Thou would be with our elected officials this day as they make decisions and deliberate on issues that impact our community, that they might be mindful of both sides, and that we would have a spirit of civility and understanding and learning. And this we ask and pray in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. And given the nature of the unique situation where I'm wearing two hats for a couple more weeks, I've asked Council Vice Chair Dave Connect to conduct this meeting.
Thank you, Dave. Before we proceed with the agenda, I would like to remind those in attendance that although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those seated at the council dais will be able to speak or ask questions unless otherwise allowed by the chair. First item for business is a presentation on the proposal to build a medical school on a portion of the East Bay Golf Course. And we will have representatives from Wasatch Educational give us a presentation.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Sewell and Councilman Connect, other honored council members. It's a pleasure for me to be able to stand before you again and share with you some facts, some truisms regarding the proposed medical school construction on the northeast sector of the golf course. I appreciate the opportunity of being able to also share these facts and these truths with those who are seated behind me, and want everyone here to know whether they're in favor of or not in favor of this proposal. That we come in peace. We're not trying to do anything to destroy relationships. We respect those who have an interest in the golfing community. I myself consider myself to be a former golfer, but I certainly don't want anybody here to think that we're adversarial. I just came from, and I don't know whether this is even appropriate, Councilman Connect, in regards to, we just barely came from the official announcement of the medical school at the Provo Town Center Mall. In a venue there that Scott Bowles and the Brixton Capital people have allowed us to use, and it was a very touching experience when Andy Norda, as we made the announcement of the Norda Medical School, the Norda College of Osteopathic Medicine, as he shared about a 2-minute perspective on how his parents integrated into this community and the good that they did. And I don't know if it's appropriate to ask him to come up and share that, because I think it would be beneficial. I don't think it'll be, it's not one side or the other. I think it'd just be good for the residents here to hear his testimony of that experience. And since Andy is the representative of that great foundation, I thought it'd be appropriate if at least I could inquire as to whether or not he could come up.
I'd advise that it's their 20 minutes, however they want to use it.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Andy?
Acting Mayor Sewell and members of the council, thanks for letting me share this. There was a time during the infancy of Nobel where a decision had to be made to stay in Utah or move to Silicon Valley, and against a lot of advice, my dad decided to stay here in Utah. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, I grew up in Ogden. I got my EE degree because of a GI Bill, and I couldn't find work in Utah. There was work, but not a lot of it back then. He says, I always felt bad that I had to leave town and I didn't get to take care of mom and dad. Grandkids didn't get to see mom and dad. He goes, this town here, he says, it's the most highly educated workforce I've come across. He goes, and a lot of them are bilingual. He goes, for an international company, we can make it work here. But the pure intent behind him building, a huge success here in Provo, it tears me up a little bit when I see what pure intent can do. He had the intent to make a huge company, but behind it all, he wanted families to not have to leave or leave town. So he looked at, his tenure at Novell as an investment in the community, Utah Valley, and Utah in general. And by doing this new medical school, he, in a way, continues to do that. And so it's an investment in the community. And I just thought you guys would like to hear about Ray Norda's intent. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, council members, for allowing him to share that. The Nordas are an iconic company here, and we're very, very pleased to be able to partner with them. Let's see, how is that over here? Oh, okay, thank you. I have up on the screen it's kind of an excerpt of the vision of Provo City, and you say the Provo City, the values are faith, respect, and service to each other and our community, individual responsibility, our environment, and natural amenities. We support safe, desirable neighborhoods, a vibrant economy, and high-quality jobs, fiscally responsible governance, and lifelong education. And I will tell you, in all my experience in working with the council, that is a very, very effective and accurate description of what I see all of you living. I want you to know that we also support a vibrant economy and high-paying jobs, fiscally responsive government, and also lifelong learning education opportunities. As a young boy, I grew up in Spanish Fork, Utah County boy. I will tell you, I spent most of my young years here working in Provo, picking cherries and working in the, working on merit badges at BYU and all the other things that young boys do. I remember shopping in the old Sears building, which many of you probably don't remember, on 100 West, watching BYU football games. I spent a lot of time in Provo. Even though I was born and raised and in Spanish Fork, my mother worked here as a single mother of 4 children. Since the age of 4, she became a single mother to me, and spent most of her adult life working here in Provo at F.G. Ferry & Son. I don't know, I'm sure George probably remembers that. And also Safeway. She spent a lot of time working in Provo. So Provo was kind of a backyard second home for me as I grew up. After I left Spanish Fork as an adult and went to BYU and graduated from BYU, I then went to the University of Utah, and I do wear blue, by the way, but graduated from the University of Utah and then entered the United States Navy Medical Service Corps. And there I was committed for 3 years during Vietnam, and ended up spending 20 years. That's where I met my lifelong friend and business partner and co-founder of Wasatch Education and Rocky Mountain University, Dr. Mike Skurja, who is here today. Mike and I engaged ourselves in teaching and training in our clinical electrophysiology specialty within the Navy. We spent a lot of times traveling around the United States teaching while we were in the Navy as naval officers. And following our retirement in the early 1990s, with both of us spending the equivalent of about 50 years in military service to our country, we decided that we would want to continue on our teaching opportunities, the things that we had done well while we were in the Navy, besides being clinical providers of patients. We believed firmly in the art and science of education. And so we started, we moved, we retired. He went with his family to San Diego. I returned here to the Provo area with my family. And we decided to start an institute here. It's called the Institute of Clinical Electrophysiology. Many of you probably have never heard of that, but for 4 years, we actually had that business over in Brigham's Landing from 1994 to 1998. We recruited students from all over the United States who came in, faculty who came in and helped us teach the electrophysiology curriculum. At the end of that training, every single one of those, and by the way, when they are out here, they stayed here in Provo. They ate food here in Provo. They walked, they participated in recreation activities in Provo. At the end of their training, at the very bottom of their certificate was very key words here. And again, it's near and dear to my heart because of the way I grew up. And that was the Institute of Clinical Electrophysiology, Provo, Utah. We brought great credit to Provo through that 4 years, and at that time, Mike and I decided that we would expand our vision and take that Institute of Clinical Electrophysiology into a whole different perspective. It was our desire to build the most prestigious, premier, world-class university in the world for graduate healthcare education. That was our intention. A university founded on the core principle of service. Our vision was to get the university accredited by the highest accreditation commission in the world through the United States Department of Education, through the Northwest Commission in Seattle. And then to turn those students, train them, and turn them out to become the most powerful healthcare providers that anyone else could provide them training to become in this country. That was our vision when we started in 1998. 3 years prior to that, during preparatory work, we worked hard to secure a facility, to identify faculty, to draft curricula. And in 1998, Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions and Wasatch Education was born here in Provo, Utah. From 1998 to 2011, for those 13 years, we developed programs in clinical electrophysiology, pediatric science, orthopedic and sports medicine, neurology, hand rehabilitation, geriatrics, cardiopulmonary pathophysiology, women's health, physical therapy, occupational therapy, health promotion and wellness, athletic training, and master's degree programs as well. Those were all doctoral programs. Our students came, they were educated, they stayed in Utah, in Provo, they resided here, they bought food here, they entertained while they were here, and again, when they graduated, at the bottom of their on their diploma, which said Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions, said Provo, Utah, at the very bottom. Now, we did attain our goal of becoming accredited through the most prestigious and reputable accreditation agency in the world, the Northwest Commission, through the United States Department of Education. It took us 13 years. We did that right here in Provo. The cost of about $10 million. Mayor John Curtis, in that day in February of 2011, Mayor Curtis had 1 year under his belt as a mayor. And we had developed a very superficial relationship with him. I hadn't gotten to know him quite yet. But I remember specifically the day that we received notice from the Accreditation Commission that Rocky Mountain University was going to become regionally accredited. It was the biggest day in the history of our university. After 13 years of working on that process at the cost that we spent doing that. And I remember calling Mayor and say, Mayor, is there any way you can drop whatever you're doing and come over here and participate in the announcement to our faculty, to our staff, to our employees about this wonderful experience? And he did. I don't know what he dropped, but he did. And I'll never forget that because he had an interest in what we were doing because of what we were bringing to Provo, Utah. Fast forward, right now we have graduated over 2,000 graduates from Rocky Mountain University, from WEI. Those 2,000 graduates are seen right now somewhere in this country, including right here in Provo and Utah County and throughout Utah. Over 6 million patients a year are being seen by those 2,000 graduates. That's 25,000 patients a day are being seen by these graduates, all of which have on their diploma at the very bottom, Provo, Utah. They're being seen in PT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language pathology, orthopedic and sports, neurology, all the other programs that I just said to you. Wherever those diplomas are hanging, either in hospital or hospital-based or school-based clinics, clinics or geriatric clinics, or in academic institutions or research facilities, Provo, Utah is at the bottom of that. Now, our students have and our faculty have published over 800 refereed journal articles in over 260 peer-reviewed journals. That's a huge contribution to the new knowledge pool. And at the bottom of every one of those publications is a description of where they were when they did the research. And Rocky Mountain University is in 260 refereed, peer-reviewed journals, professional journals, Provo, Utah. They're a graduate. Now I'm going to move on and skip a little bit of this, but I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about that because of my connections to Provo. And ever since Mayor Curtis came over in February of 2011 and he gave his welcome speech to us now as newly accredited an institution, he put his arm around my shoulders and he said, "Welcome to Provo." And I promised him at that time, I will never leave Provo. The culture that is here in Provo is what draws our students here. It's not Salt Lake County. It's not Utah County. It's Provo. Our students are drawn here. We attract some of the highest esteemed faculty in the world in some of the universities who come to us. They pick up their stuff, they move their families, they quit their jobs, they move across country, and they settle here in Provo. And it's not the church, the LDS church, that brings them here. It's the culture that they all share with us here in Provo. Our graduates are affecting change in the way healthcare is delivered. We send out every year over 4,000 room nights from our students who come in from all 50 states. We have students representing all 50 states. 4,000 room nights to the local economy on hotel nights. Our students buy houses in Provo. They pay taxes in Provo. They shop for food and clothes and cars in Provo. They go to movie theaters and get entertainment here in Provo. When they come into Provo and the sign that says "Welcome Home," I've had many of them say, "You know what? I feel that they made that sign for me. I feel like Provo was my home." Dr. Scourgeon and I had a vision in 2011, and the vision came from the fact that there were so many people in the state of Utah who were having to go outside of the state of Utah to receive medical education, including our native sons and daughters right here in Utah County, right here in Provo. Most of those, 300 of those, are from BYU alone, that have to leave this state to go to other states every year to attend medical school. So we felt like by doing feasibility studies and needs assessments and visioning conferences and doing the research to determine whether or not a medical school here was something that not only was in demand, but also was it something that we, as a university and as a Wasatch Education, can do. So it wasn't just about building a medical school, it was becoming united with partners such as the Norda Foundation and other investors who are here with us today, who have put in $120 million so far toward this $148 million project. They didn't invest because of anything else, but like return on their investment. You ask Andy Norda why his Norda Foundation invested. He won't say it's because of the returns on their money. He will tell you it's because of the community of Provo. Ray and Ty Norda had an interest in this community, in Utah County and in Provo. Our other investors have invested in the community. They're not investing in the medical school per se. They're investing in the community. And that's a huge thing for you all to understand. The Nordas are very socially minded, and I'm very, very honored and very humbled that the investors that are in this room with me now, right now, sitting behind me, have put up that kind of money to be invested in this, hopefully in this particular community. We have been able to, what we feel like, have been able to achieve the goal that we set of becoming the most prestigious university in graduate healthcare education in the United States. Now, I read in the newspaper this morning someone who was interviewed saying that about this proposed project, that the medical school will destroy East Bay. And I would ask how could all the good that we're doing and that we propose to do destroy East Bay? That is not, I want you to know, council members, that is not our intent. Our intent is not to destroy anything. Our intent is to build. Our intent is to give back That's what we're here for. Why are we here? We are here, according to that slide, because 375 new physicians every year have to be created in Utah in order to meet the state's growing medical needs. We are here, and Andy Norda and the Norda Foundation and the other investors that are here because Utah ranks 49th out of 50 in the country for primary care physicians per capita. We're here because Utah ranks 43rd out of 50 in overall physicians to population ratios. That puts Utah at near the very, very bottom in the United States as far as access to care. That's why physician assistants, and as Kim knows, nurse practitioners, it's a very good time to be either one of those right now in healthcare. We're here because more than 400 students from Utah, as I already said, leave the state every year. And we're also here because of the anticipated national physician shortage that by 2025, 150,000 physician shortages. We're here to help create a solution to that problem. Now, this is something that you all know Scott Bowles, and he sent me a letter the other day. It's been a month or so ago, and I was very touched by what he said to me. This was a personal letter that he sent to me. And I don't want to embarrass him because I know he's here, but he said, we fully support adding, now he's talking about Brixton Capital and the good that they're doing in the East Bay and the South Provo area and trying to revitalize that area, which is one of our intentions as well, to build, to develop, to grow. He said, we fully support adding a medical school to the higher education opportunities of the community, to bring high-paying technical jobs to the area and to encourage development that raises the standard for East Bay and all of Provo. And I was touched by that, and I thought I'm going to just share that with you all since you all know him. I would like to take just a couple of minutes before I sit down and share with you what our proposal that we have submitted to you is. And I know it's not unfamiliar with any of you, but for at least the people in the audience, it may not be as familiar. And I want to emphasize that these are the true facts. These are not the facts that are circulating around in social media. These are not the facts that you've been reading on some of the local internet pieces. These are not the facts that are circulating out there through verbal communication. These are the actual facts of how this piece of property could be enhanced and how Provo City and Utah County in general can be enhanced. I'd like to draw your attention to the upper part of here. That's the very familiar piece that you know of, and that's the Nature Sunshine piece. Currently, we have that under contract, and that will serve as housing, and not only for our students and also perhaps some public, but also some retail space will also act as an entrance piece to the northern wedge of the golf course. So that's the first component of the first phase of the project. If you look into the purple area, of course, the retention pond, which is owned by Provo City, and we're going to continue to use that as a retention pond if we are successful in getting your approval for this. But the northern part of the northern wedge, if you see buildings 1 and 2, that connotates the medical school facilities, 225,000 square feet of medical school space. Number 3 over here is a parking structure that would be used to accommodate the medical school students and employees as well as future growth. Continuing on, if you look at and by the way, in order for us to do that, as you all know, it's going to require us to relocate 3 holes of the golf course, numbers 10, 11, and 12. Now, we heard from Val Hill this morning in our announcement that Val Hill says he thinks that the golfing gods have cursed him because every time he's on 10, 11, and 12, he never, ever can master those holes. Nonetheless, we have to relocate those 3 holes, and we plan on doing that, as you know, to the southeastern sector of Provo. Now, my understanding is that part of that relocation will include also to build an island hole, which my understanding is that's going to be the only island hole in the entire state of Utah, and I don't know if that's a true statement or not. If you look at the next phase, by the way, that first phase is the first 7 years, which would be from 2018 through 2024-ish. The next phase of that would start in 2024 and go from year 8 to year 15. And in year 2024, Okay, I'm going to come back to these in just a second, but I know we need to move on. In phase 2 would be from 2024, where you see buildings 4, 5, and 6. 4 and 7 will be Rocky Mountain University relocation buildings from our current campus on the Novell campus. Number 6 is a Rocky Mountain University Research Center, and number 5 would be a student union for all that campus. The parking garage there would accommodate all of that, and this, again, is all on the northern wedge, the southern wedge being where the yellow is. Now, if I can go back just to look at this building, I'll just show you this building here. I've gone to 7 different states in the United States over the last little while, including Washington and Alabama, Virginia, South Carolina, several other states. And I brought back, just from my recent trip to Alabama, this is the Auburn campus of the VIA College of Osteopathic Medicine. It's a beautiful facility. If you look at the other version, the front end version of that, we want to capture the architecture that's going to blend in with the current architecture here in Provo, the traditional type of architecture. We don't want to be contemporary in the building that we choose to pursue with the structure. So we expect that all those buildings on that site that you just saw are going to be very, very beautiful buildings. Coming in from the southern corridor, is going to be a very beautiful site for those who come into Provo from the southern sector. The next phase, which will be the third phase, is what we have as a proposal to the commission, to the council, is a 14-acre parcel which we have referred to as the southern wedge, and that's portrayed here in the in the gold and yellow. The southern wedge is another thing that would require us to relocate another 3 holes of the golf course. Now notice the year. That would be 2033 or later, and probably later. But at least the option, the proposed option would be for 2033, that we would be able to take the 14 acres of the southern wedge and use that to expand the healthcare and medical school campuses to include healthcare clinics, biomedical and biotechnology, research facilities, possibly an optometry school, a podiatry school, some retail space, and some medical devices. And you'll see number 9 over here on the gold is representation of a clinic that we were one clinic that we would propose be built on that southern wedge. So 3 holes of the golf course would be required to be relocated should that happen in 2033 or later. Now, I would like to end by just reminding the council from the discussion we had not too long ago. We recently hired an independent economic impact company called Bonneville Research out of Salt Lake City, and they did an independent research, economic impact. And I'd really like to re-emphasize this to the council, as well as particularly introduce this to the people sitting behind me. During just the Norda College of Osteopathic Medicine construction, that's before Rocky Mountain University relocates itself to that site, more than $62 million would be invested in this community in construction business. 236 construction-related jobs, and it would bring in over 121 high-paying medical school jobs to the city. Now, that's just the Norda College of Osteopathic Medicine in the first 7 to 8 years. If you add in Rocky Mountain University with the Norda College of Osteopathic Medicine, the combined economic impact on this community and this county will be $100 million annually. Beginning in 2024 and continuing, approximately 1,550 new jobs will be added. More than $83 million in construction business total for those 2 medical institutions. More than $8 million will be directed to the Provo School District in the first 15 years. And as Bob Springmeyer brought out when he talked to you all a couple of weeks ago, the medical school will be an attractor to other health, medical, biomedical, biotechnology, and related spin-off businesses. Hundreds of additional jobs and much more property tax and revenues for this community. Now, we will continue to be a wonderful business in Provo as long as Provo wants us to be here. I've always felt Provo was my home. And as long as we feel that Provo is willing to have us here, we're willing to be here and bring the great credit to Provo and recognition to this great city that we've already done in the last 20 years and will continue to do. We want to represent the values and the vision that was set forth by the Provo City forefathers and foremothers. We want to be a good neighbor, bringing value and business to the East Bay Golf Course. In fact, 500 to 600 of our employees and our students on that campus, most of them are golfers. A lot of them are golfers, and we expect that there'll be some sort of a spike in the annual usage rates. I can't quote that as a benefit, but I know that we're very health conscious, and having golf that close, we would hope that we could be part of the East Bay family. We want to provide the junior and senior high school students of the Provo School District with health and medical internship experiences to stimulate their desires and their interest in pursuing medical and healthcare careers. That's one of the things that is going to benefit the junior and senior high schools. Now, in closing, we want to let you all know, and especially those behind us, that we will take good care of this property. There's going to be significant green space in and around the campus. Park-like atmosphere to protect and preserve the environment, nature, wildlife, and bird life. We want to offer a beautiful and relaxing environment for students, faculty, and visitors. Natural walkways, trails. Again, protecting the fowl, the wildlife. No cement jungles. We're not going to be, no disrespect to Thanksgiving Point, but we're not going to be another Thanksgiving Point. We want to do our part to stimulate and revitalize East Bay and South Provo. Now, this is an interesting statistic that you have to step out of where you are right now and into the future. Besides the economic impact of over $1 billion in the first 10 years of operation and the 3 years of development, more than 8,750 medical student physicians over the first 50 years of the expected 100-year life cycle for this medical school. Over the first 50 years, if you look at the graduates of the first 50 classes of the medical school, over 40 years that they'll practice, those students graduating from Provo, Utah, will see over 1.4 billion patients. Now, if you add into that the number of family members that are always caught up whenever someone is sick, there could be over 4 billion people in this world who are influenced by graduates of this medical school from Provo, Utah, just in the first 50 classes that graduate. University of Utah's medical school started in 1903. They're 114 years old. We do not anticipate this medical school being less than 100 years old. Here's our timelines. In March of 2019, we would anticipate groundbreaking. And of course, we will communicate with and work with the city and East Bay golfing community on that. Construction as well. Construction will be completed in January of 21. Applications would start being received at that time. The first class would begin in August of that year, 2021. In May of 2024, RMU campus would be relocated, and in between 24 and 26, the RMU medical school expansion would occur. Now remember, all of that is before the 2033 cycle for the southern wedge coming in as an option. I'll end by quoting again what I just said, what I heard from, and what I read in an article this morning about someone quoted saying that if we are allowed to come on here, that we would destroy East Bay. I would ask you all to consider, truly, does all that look like our intent is to destroy East Bay? Our intent is to revitalize East Bay, revitalize South Provo, to create opportunities for our native sons and daughters, our children. They don't have to leave Utah to go to medical school. To be able to send them out into the world and let them have positive patient encounters and make a difference, whether they're surgeons, whether they're pediatricians, whether they're psychiatrists, whether they're orthopedists, whatever specialty they are. We desire to give, not take away. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much for your attention. And do I open it up for questions, or how do we do that, Councilman?
I think we'll probably reserve questions unless there's something really pressing and hear from our Parks Department.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate the opportunity.
I want to say thank you for this opportunity. I feel like our job today is to relate this recent proposal to the current site and current operations that are happening at the East Bay Golf Course. I'll be joined by some of our best talent in Parks and Recreation, Brett Watson, our golf professional and manager, and also Doug Robbins, Assistant Director, and I'll be bringing up the out of the bullpen at the end with some final comments. But this time I'll defer over to Brett Watson.
Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. East Bay Golf Course was originally just to the side. Got it. Sorry, excuse me. Originally, the Timpanogos Golf Course was at the site where the current Sam's Club and Novell and the East Bay shopping area is now. It sat there until the mid-1980s before it was moved to the south where the current East Bay site is now. In that time, and since that time, over 100 years, golf has seen ups and downs, but not really in Provo. Provo golf is growing rapidly, especially amongst young people. And if you look there, more than 55% of the golfers that use East Bay are under the age of 40. So we hear a lot of myths and national trends that are saying that, you know, golf is dying and it's not popular amongst young people. That's not true, especially here in Provo. Our student rounds from all of the universities in the area have doubled in the last 5 years, and out of that, the BYU and UVU classes have tripled just in the last year alone. One of the biggest trends we're seeing are more women taking up the game of golf too. That's actually a national trend, and we're seeing that at East Bay as well. This is a snapshot of the rounds played, broken down by city, but each of those cities has one public golf course, and so it kind of gives you an idea of where we set up. Our nearest competitor is about 10,000 rounds short, and then as you can see, it drops off from there. East Bay, this past year in our current use statistics. So as of right now, we're on pace to have over 70,000 rounds. That is a new record at East Bay. And certainly, we've estimated that over 250,000 people have been to the golf course just this year in many various ways. We've sold over 20,000 buckets of range balls. That's up 33% from last year. Like I said, this has been our busiest year in history, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's our longest sustained period at the East Bay site of being left alone with consistency. It allows us to grow. Our Par 3 junior course, which we're here about today, is 15% of that revenue and 15% of our business. Because of that and because of the longest period of consistency, we're becoming what we were originally designed to be, and that was a community hub, a community facility for not just Provo, but the entire Utah Valley area, which has made us the busiest course. A lot of times you'll see the subsidy may come up about golf, and it's a subsidized sport. Our hope this next fiscal year is to have a complete elimination of that subsidy. And so as we go into the public discussions with that, we will present that to you. Just in the last 2 years, or this year and into next year, we'll host 3 state high school championships. Those are over a period of 2 days. That brings in thousands of people from all over the state. They're staying in Provo, shopping in Provo. Same goes for statewide qualifiers. Again, they need to come to Provo, stay here. And then the other events that we host, like the Provo Open, which for the majority of its infancy and then as it got into its bigger years was supported by the Norda Foundation. Millions of dollars was put towards charity and some mainly dealing with cleft palates. This past year we were honored to be the first ever host of the Utah Women's Open. That made Provo and East Bay and Timpanogos golf courses the first golf courses in the state to host every single event that the state of Utah can host. It was a tremendous honor, and to show that how well they liked East Bay and liked Provo, they've asked to come back for the next 3 years, and then we'll sit down and talk again in conjunction with the Utah Open. They've asked us to host the Utah State Amateur, which is the oldest and longest continuous tournament in the world, in 2020. So that's the also a major championship that brings people from all over the state and frankly over the western United States in. This past September, we hosted the BYU Cross Country Fall Autumn Classic. We signed a 10-year agreement with them to bring them in every year. This past event, it was an estimated 5,000 people were there on that Saturday and the days leading up to it. Those groups are coming in, staying in Provo, eating in Provo, sleeping in Provo, spending their dollars in Provo, and that's just the one event. In conjunction with that, we sat down with the leaders at BYU and have secured the 2018 and 2021 NCAA Cross Country Championships. That's an estimated 10,000 people come into those two events. They're both hosted in November, and we're able to host those things because of the unique setup of East Bay Golf Course. Our youth programs. We host hundreds of juniors throughout the state and all over the county, both in leagues and in camps and some things with BYU, and Nike has a camp that's coming next year. As part of that, there's a national movement called the Youth on Course Foundation. Youth on Course allows junior golfers to play for $1. So the stigma of golf's too expensive or it's a rich white man's sport, it just doesn't jive with that, and it's not seen here. And of the Youth on Course program, we are 33% of the state's junior users. So 33% of those junior golfers are coming to play in Provo in East Bay. They're coming from everywhere. In addition to that, we host about 8 to 10 high school events per year. We just hosted the 2017 1A state titles, and then we'll host the 2018. It'll be a boys championship in the fall. Another thing that we were just asked was to be the first host site of the First Tee of Utah County. That's an after-school program and an in-school program to get kids out on the course, to get them active, to get them playing. And so we're really excited to start that program next spring. We talk about the home of high school golf and college golf. Since 2012, there have been 13 individual and team state titles. We're the home school or the home course to both Provo and Timpview, but also to Mountain View and Orem, and the host of Utah Valley's men's and women's golf teams. We also host BYU as a secondary course to Riverside, although I feel like they're there a lot more than the secondary. Why is East Bay Golf Course important? Well, one of this slide, and I'm sure we've all seen this, is the total population, or the top 10 populations in Utah by city. And as you can see, that Provo only has one public golf course. That's why this is such a hot topic and why it's important. It's not like there are 6 other choices like there is in Salt Lake. Councilman Harding, I'm going to use your quote again because we tried so hard to sum this up, and if you don't mind, I'll read it. And he quotes, "Let's not be too quick to sell off parks and rec venues or programs that only serve a minority interest group. A majority of the residents don't play tennis. Should we sell all the courts? The ice sheet doesn't attract a majority of the residents. Shall we join the county in trying to sell it? Our rec league soccer program is pretty popular, but not compared to the total population of the city. The Provo River Trail, Rock Canyon, the rec center, popular, not visited by a majority. Parks taken individually don't make the cut. But taken together, the city provides an awesome array of recreation opportunities. There should be something of interest to nearly everyone." I think that's such a powerful statement in the fact that the niche activity, yes, it's a niche activity, but so's everything else. And taken as a whole, that's what allows us to win all those awards and have such a wonderful quality of life for our residents. Golf is affordable at East Bay for everyone in Provo. So a lot of times you'll hear Riverside is the answer. Riverside's for the upper 5% and a public or a private golf course. East Bay is a prolific developer of golfers of all ages. That's one of the beauties of it. It's a community legacy and an asset. It is the front and center of the south end of Provo. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful sight when you come into the south end of Provo. It's par 3 executive course. Again, why we're here. It's what makes it unique and special. It allows us to provide that community event space, the cross-country meets, the concerts, anything that we can host those there. And in addition to that, still be a destination facility. Still bring in championship players from the PGA Tour all the way down to a 4-year-old that's learning how to play golf with his family for $1. Next would be the economic impact. I could stand up here and spout off numbers about how many millions and millions of dollars we bring into the city. Fact is, one fact we know is that golf is a larger economic producer than skiing in the state of Utah. So as I joked, we should probably have the best golf in Utah on our license plates, or best for skiing. All of these logos are just groups that we've worked with this past year in facilitating business and some of the things that they've done at the golf course, whether it's a golf tournament, meetings upstairs, those types of things. I can't honestly give you the answer right now with the amount of economic revenue that's generated in the city, but I can tell you that people come into Provo, they're spending their dollars, they're coming to East Bay, they're leaving and going to Home Depot, they're going to various places, they're buying gas. And not only that, we don't know what the amount of people coming in, what business deals are occurring on the golf course. I've been a part of them, and some of them generate millions of dollars. In fact, Vox Marketing has their golf tournament at the beginning or at the end of the year every year, and they bring in an estimated $20 million off of it. Their quote was, if Provo City is thinking of changing or getting rid of East Bay, that makes us question whether or not we want to stay in Provo. I don't know if that carries across the rest of that board, but it's certainly an option or an idea that is out there. Last of all, we talked about it, it's on a landfill. So yes, if we could go back and say, man, we don't want to dump our trash next to where I-15 could be, we probably all in this room would go do that. But unfortunately, we don't. The greatest part about that is the topography. It's flat. We're able to host anybody. They can walk it from ages 3 to 100. It's extended season. Fortunately, with the methane underneath us, we melt a little faster than everyone else. And so we're open for play a little earlier than everyone else. One of the things through the ups and downs of golf in Provo that stayed consistent has been our customer service. And we're affordable and efficient. What I mean by efficient is our water bill is not that high because we use reclaimed water. So a lot of golf courses don't have that luxury. We do. And then lastly, our junior course, our executive course, where we can build golfers. Creates our own future. It keeps us sustained. It's 15% of the revenue. It's where all of our programming starts, from the high schools to the universities to the youth on course. Again, everyone can use it. Everyone can play on it. It's the barrier breaker for golf. And then cross country, special events, foot golf, all of those different types of things don't occur in Provo if we don't have that executive course. Those are where those things happen. This is just the last cross-country meet that we hosted in September. Again, as I said, there were about 5,000 people. Almost every single high school from the state of Utah, southern Wyoming, southern Idaho were here over a couple days using the facility. And then, you know, we've talked about it earlier. We've heard what do the residents of Provo feel or the area. This is this morning's Daily Herald poll. I think that's a strong answer as to how residents feel about it. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on why I love my job and why East Bay is so cool and so important. Top left corner is a family. The young man in the front in the Captain America shirt was recently diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And the Aloha Golf Classic, which Mayor-elect Kafusi and Mayor Curtis have helped us with in the past, was able to provide that family some money to help with their medical bills. The middle is a family at the Utah Women's Open. The rest are just different events that happen in East Bay, from a polar plunge to a ping pong tournament to a wedding. All of those different things occur at East Bay in the way that it's set up now in its current form. And I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the unique site characteristics down at the East Bay Golf Course. Provo happens to have one of the largest population densities due to census data that's received in 2010 of any community its size in the United States. And because of that density, and as the city continues to grow, the opportunity to really sprawl is becoming a limited option. Things are going much more vertical, as we can see downtown. And so the need for this type of open space that we currently enjoy at the golf course is going to be even needed more and more in the future. Landfill conditions right now that exist underneath the small soil cap that we have is managed quite well by the golf course. And all of these species that you see on this slide exist and make the golf course their home as habitat. It is also the confluence of several small streams as they flow to Utah Lake. Speaking about water, it is really critical to this site. Many people in the community don't know that when they use their sink or send some household water down the drain, what they're doing is watering and irrigating their golf course. We have aeration systems throughout these ponds, which further filters the water through the soils and cleans it as it heads to Utah Lake. That really helps to offset some of those algal bloom issues that are occurring more frequently in Utah Lake. This low-cost irrigation is a real competitive advantage for us. We have some pump costs that run our pumps to pump this water into our irrigation system, but we don't pay culinary water charges. And so that's a real benefit to us. The lakes were constructed on this course with some federal money to create a floodplain to protect the city. And these mediation to actually fill these and build upon them would require some permits, some mitigation credits, and these costs and also the risks involved in doing so need to be fully explored. Some other site considerations are the instability due to the gases that Brett mentioned earlier, and the 13 plus feet of trash throughout the site that was found in the geotechnical boring samples that were done. The geotech indicates that these are poor soils for easy construction, so it'll be somewhat a complex process to build multi-story buildings on this site. The good news is this site is currently maintained in a stable condition as a golf course, but it should be clearly understood that any alteration to the site would expose the city to additional risks and costs that need to be carefully considered. So when the golf course was capped, they were working under some different environmental regulations. This diagram here shows some of the more current modern mitigation techniques that are used with a non-permeable membrane, and then venting also the gases that are produced from landfill sites away. So we're really dealing with just a soil cap, and right now it's working quite well, but any alteration that would also expose us to those risks. We've got some new EPA regulations that need to be considered. And then also there's lots of examples of when these types of projects, these development projects, have not been successful. You don't have to go very far to see in Spanish Fork. They've had an experience there, and other places throughout the country. It doesn't take an exhaustive Google search to find examples, many examples of where this kind of project failed. So I think what we're trying to say is that any pursuit of this proposal should be gone into with eyes wide open, all the costs and all the risks exposed, so that a wise decision could be made. So considering all of these site considerations, to be sure any change to what we currently have at this site exposes potentially to these risks and additional costs. And we would argue at this point that the golf course may indeed meet the highest and best use for this property, for the community and its needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to finish out, I will go over the proposal that we have recently received and related to the impact on the facility. So the first property we're talking about, shaded in green, is the Nature's Sunshine property. It's privately held. So the proposal on this property, and Wayne and Dixon Holmes may have to correct me on some of the negotiations, so they were the lead negotiators on this, but right now, this is talked about as part of this proposal. They will be reimbursed for their purchase price for Nature's Sunshine by the city. And then the acreage, which is to the left, is owned by Provo City. So that would be another 1.6 acres that would be provided at no cost to the medical school development. And also any mitigation about land and water and or wetlands would be, those costs would be covered by Provo City. We're looking at probably that reimbursement to be somewhere around $2.5 million for the Nature's Sunshine property for the purchase. I should be clicking my clicker more to keep up with my own talk here. All right, 10, 11, 12. This is what we term the North Wedge. This is 21 acres, and if you apply the same value down here as you do up here, just by the purchase price and offer that was done up here at approximately $300,000 per acre, that is approximately $6.3 million of value Out of this, there is the agreement is that the medical school development will cover the cost of the development of the 3 holes on the former Cooney property. So as I look at it, we have 18 holes now, no matter, I've got a slice too, so the water does bother me when I golf also, but we're going from 18 holes now and bringing back 3 holes brings us back to 18. So when you're looking at the actual purchase price, it's mitigation costs, it's not purchase costs. As part of their proposed agreement, that we would be utilizing them as the contractor to put in the 3 holes on the Cooney property, the 3 mitigation holes. To me, that is almost like literally paying yourself. And I think contractor motivated by cost savings, I don't know, and keeping those cost savings, I don't know if that delivers probably the best quality 3 holes that we would be looking for. And it does get to that point, mitigation does not equal compensation. We come back to where we were as a golf course with 18 holes of championship golf, and it's completely mitigated, but that estimated $6.3 million in value is not received by Provo City. On the South Wedge, this is 15 years at least out. So included in the agreement is a pricing index, which will determine the future value of this based on whatever is negotiated as part of these terms. So it would not be, from what I understand, the current part of the proposal would not be part of the appraisal that they receive at that time. This is where we see the drastic change of golf, all those pretty pictures of cross-country meets and diverse use of the golf course and younger use, because this would most likely take out the junior golf course because those holes would have to be most likely located there. Then the option for this property is held by the developer. Obviously, we have a preference, and we like our administration and leaders that are elected, and we would like that decision to be held with our elected officials and not deferred to a developer for a later decision. And that does get us to that idea, who should make this decision for golf in our community? Is it a developer looking for possible profit base, or is it somebody that is looking out for our community as a whole? And then the balance of the course, 50 years that this group would hold a right of first refusal for the balance of the course. And that really, depending on how those play out, could be the end of the golf course. Before we went into today, this was the only picture I had seen of the development for the proposed development for the golf course. Obviously, there are more maps here. I did get emailed when I was sitting upstairs. We had to do this presentation sometime, so I had to go with the information that I had. And so you can see that the major properties are located in the 10, 11, and 12, and you can see that the Nature Sunshine property and even this, even though they are not shown here, are even somewhat speculative on their site plan. As we talk about a major project like this, I think we probably should have more specifics on what is going on these different areas. These 2 articles came out the day of Councilmember Van Buren's rally, and it talked about a win-win solution. And you can see from the project, it's a little more complicated than that. I think we'd all love win-win, and I think we can still get there, and I really feel confident in that. I think the bones of a win-win project are land purchase that is balanced, the specifics on how the 3 holes are replaced, how future land interests are developed. I would say the reason we had to move this meeting today is probably because of the option more than anything, in that the golfers would like to work with their elected officials on the future of golf and not defer that to a developer. And then if there are any capital and any funds or proceeds that come out of this, which right now there is not, that we could show our commitment to the golf course and to citizens and make some of those improvements along the way that have been deferred. This is how golf has reacted to perception and or decisions over the years. You see it starts out with a golf course project where holes were moved. You can see that anytime a course goes under construction, it takes a major hit. So we took a drop here. A decision to privatize golf was here. Now, one thing that's noted after that is this rise in use. I made the comment earlier today, I think a chimpanzee could have managed golf during the Tiger Woods era and seen raises in play. But you can see after lack of investment and management techniques that privatization starts to drop on its own with no project related to it. Provo City buys out of that private management contract here. We start to see the increase, then Southgate is proposed and some construction is done. We see it diminish going down here. And then at this point, we decide to move away from the finance managing the golf course model to Parks and Recreation managing that model. And I think you can see how the graph goes up. I fixed those years for you, Cliff, on that. So let me just talk about golf's true story. Golf's true story is efficiency in government. I've said at last couple of years at our budget meetings when we are talking about the rec center covering its costs, covering its future needs, and giving $500,000 back to the general fund, that the golf course is Provo's next success story after that. And we're very proud of what is happening there, and extremely proud of our golf professional and manager, Brett Watson. We have the best in the industry here. We are going to propose subsidy elimination in this next budget, depending on what is happening with the decision process here. We do all this by increasing use. You saw how high we are used, and decreasing our subsidy. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that Provo uses their recreation facilities at a high level. We've seen this at the ice arena. We see this at the Covey Center. We've seen this at the Recreation Center also. There's not a community that would not trade for East Bay's pro forma, and it's something we're very proud of. The medical school spends a lot of time on selling their need in the community, and I hope you guys know that through every meeting the way it's been, there's never been a pitch about one versus the other. What we just needed to understand together is the impacts on a facility that has an existing use, and why that use is important, and why that vibrant facility is important to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe that completes the presentations from both sides. And did we have any discussion at this point with the council, or did we want to move to the next item?
I'd like to get copies of what we're being proposed for now, so that we can have those to study and to look at and see. I just haven't seen those. This is the first time that I've seen some of these things, and I'd like to get some detail on those. And how do we go about that? Cliff, can you get those for us from the administration so that we know what we're dealing with here?
Dixon, is what you sent me, is that still a current? So if we got copies of that, I would, okay. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Dixon some questions. It was stated that we would be subsidizing the Nature Sunshine acquisition by Rocky Mountain University. My understanding is it's a tax increment. Could you explain the difference and what actually would be happening?
So the way the current proposal is currently structured is that Provo City would not purchase the Nature Sunshine piece. That would be purchased by Rocky Mountain University of Health Professionals, or Wasatch, by Wasatch Educational, who is the parent company for Rocky Mountain. The main purpose for acquiring that piece of property is for access, but they also want to be able to control what happens on that piece of property. And so they are acquiring it, and the city, and this has been a very iterative process, back and forth. And so the current proposal is that they would purchase the property up front. The city would create a community development area, which would require the city, the school district, and Utah County to participate with that.
And have those entities agreed to do that yet?
That would have to be determined in the future. Again, that's not established right now, but that's one of the deal points that the city would agree to work towards that. And then they would be able to earn up to half of the cost of that based on the terms. Most terms on CDAs right now are between 10 and 12 years. That's a parameter that the school district has given us. Based on the valuation of the property, they would have the ability to earn up to half of that. And if it's not a significant cash investment as far as the buildings, then they would, performance-based essentially, they may not be able to earn up to half their money within that time period.
Have we done this for other locations, other projects?
The redevelopment agency has purchased land, written down land costs, help acquire land for several projects in Provo City.
Examples?
Town Center Mall, Mountain Vista Business Center, the former Ironton property. Several projects right now that are still under negotiation, but in downtown where the Sears building is currently being demolished or has been demolished. It's being contemplated at the mix for Plumtree Plaza, or formerly Plumtree Plaza. Those are all redevelopment area projects. The Wells Fargo building, the Zions building.
How about the airport?
The airport, yes, for the airport ramp, yes, that was a tax increment deal, yes.
Thank you. So literally, it's really not, we're not subsidizing it. We're doing something we've done before for other projects to.
So there's no cash out of Provo City's pocket for purchasing. Again, they have to earn that back through performance-based measures. Again, adding value to the property. That's also above the current property tax that's currently being paid on the property. Because it's owned by Nature Sunshine, although they haven't built on it, it does have a tax valuation. This would all be above that baseline.
Right, so we still get what we get now, and this is what they.
We would continue to receive that, and this is again,
What they bring
based
to the
on,
property.
based on their capital investment on the project, that would set a new valuation on the property. The additional money coming into that, a portion of that would go back to reimburse them for their initial cost. And as of right now, we're talking about half of that cost.
Thank you.
What is the basis of that Nature Sunshine? Have we got a basis established yet, or will,
Basis for the taxes or basis for the value?
a basis for the taxes? I guess the golf course is a zero basis.
That's correct. Well, right now, though, the way this is contemplated, it's only on the Nature Sunshine piece that would bring in the valuation, not the golf course.
So would we not, if they put buildings on the golf course, or would those not be taxable? Would that
That would
not
be
be
up
part
to-
of the increment?
That would be up to the city, but the way this has been contemplated, it's for the Nature Sunshine piece only,
So the increment would be only on the Nature Sunshine piece?
based on what they put
And the
into.
tax that would be built on the buildings that would be built on the golf course would be at full tax rate to the
That's correct.
community. And then, what is the basis on the Nature Sunshine? Didn't they receive that at a pretty good deal? So their basis is nothing. Maybe ours is nothing too. On that, I don't know.
Give me 2 seconds and I can tell you what the property tax is on that property. But they purchased that property probably 20-plus years ago
Did they purchase it
from Provo City.
from Provo City?
There was 15 closings or extended closings on that property. They didn't close overnight. It took a while to get there. I can get you that
I
number.
can look that up online myself also, as far as
Let me
the
get it for the
particular
public good.
pieces.
I have some more questions.
Oh, sorry.
There was some concern about the geotech that's been done on the property. My understanding is Rocky Mountain has done sufficient geotech to feel comfortable to build their campus there.
That is going to be their risk and their opportunity, yes.
It's only their risk.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Dave.
I haven't seen a copy of the proposal yet, but I was wondering, are there any conditions on the option?
The way that the conditions are set now, Rocky Mount, or Wasatch Educational has requested an option on the southern wedge. If we go back to one of the later aerials. Go to the site plan. I think one of the ones that Scott had would be just fine. Go back a couple slides, please. But on the southern wedge, Wasatch Educational has proposed an option on that piece of property that could not be exercised before 15 years. Keep going. There you go. Okay. That could not be exercised for 15 years. It would require a 3-year notice. So in year 12, they would have to tell us that they would like to exercise that option. The performance measures are that they would have to maximize the property development on the Nature Sunshine piece and on the north wedge before they could exercise the option going into the southern wedge. They would also have to maintain their accreditation as a medical school, and would also have to be continued as a successfully operated medical school, and we would interpret that to be at full capacity or in an upwardly trending as far as their enrollments, not declining or struggling. That would be the criteria for as it's currently being requested for that proposal, for an option.
Was there any discussion about relocating holes that would be removed from the second wedge?
Okay, so, yeah, if I can just, sure. So the proposal would be that at the end of the day, if the option was exercised and the city agreed to that on the southern wedge, and part of the process that we are currently in, and Scott could probably give us an update on that, the city did go out for requests for proposal for professional golf course designers, just to design a golf course. I don't know where we're at in that process. Okay, so professionals are still submitting on that. Part of what that design group would be tasked with is the design of the Cooney property to receive the 3 new holes. They would also be asked to look at if the city did offer or consent to an option on the southern wedge, a redesign of the golf course to have a minimum of 18-hole par 72 course, which would more than likely eliminate the executive course as it currently sits. Part of that task also would be for that design professional to look at property south of the existing golf course to see if any of that can be used for an expansion of the golf course. They would also look elsewhere in the community, which has been interpreted to be the west side of I-15, because that's where the largest open spaces are, and potentially a canyon course or a mountain course. Those 2 last statements would be more of a third tier, not the primary responsibility or a primary role. Again, it would be the redesign of the 3 on the Cooney property. But again, to answer the specific question on the south wedge, whatever holes were impacted, and again, roughly following what's been outlined up there, whatever holes are impacted, those holes would need to be accommodated on the balance of the course. And again, more than likely, that would eliminate the executive course.
Is there land, does the city have land south or west of the freeway, or would that have to be acquired?
That land would have to be acquired. The city does own 2 sections or 2 areas of land in the canyon, at the mouth of the canyon. And Tara could probably give us what those numbers are, and then we own land up south for probably.
I'm aware of that, but nothing contiguous to the current course.
Well, we do own land south of the course that was part of the mitigation for the extension of the airport runway, and it has not been determined either through the Army Corps of Engineers or even structurally whether golf could even be built there or whatever. It would also have some
potential complications because it is further from the clubhouse.
Okay, thank you.
George?
We would have 15 years to make those decisions, I assume.
Well, 13, but because if you were going to put that in motion, part of what the design professional would be tasked with is not wait for 13 years, but start looking at some of that right now. But you're right, 15 years.
What has been the dialogue about the mountain course, a world championship Johnny Miller course in the?
I'd probably defer to Scott or Brett on what that has been. I mean, certainly it's been looked at, but my understanding is that there would need to be more property acquired
From the government?
from somebody, when that somebody would probably be the Forest Service. There are still question marks on the soil stability or the structural stability of the material that's up there, and not so much for the golf course with all that. That could be an issue, but more for any buildings or structures. And then there are no current, other than maybe power, there aren't water, sewer facilities in that area.
So nothing definitive, just some ideas.
Just some ideas. There was, Albert Haley commissioned a layout a number of years ago for an 18-hole course with 30 or 40 home sites and then maybe a half a dozen business sites, but that's never been demonstrated as far as geotechnical that I'm aware of.
So probably you would look at the current course being expanded maybe to the west, more than that, or
Potentially, if the ground could be acquired,
who knows?
it's still up in the air.
Thank you.
Don't go away. I have a question. So the 21 acres where the 3 holes are, they would relocate those, but we would be basically giving the property or getting nothing for the property?
So the 21 acres or the yellow wedge or the north wedge, the proposal would be that those 3 holes would be relocated to the Cooney property, the cost of which would be paid for by Wasatch Educational. However, we would put that out to bid. So it would be a publicly bid process that if the Wasatch Educational, if they have a partner that would like to propose on that bid, they're certainly welcome to do that. But we do not contemplate just saying, go build it for us. We would go through a public process to have that. We would oversee the design, obviously, and we probably couldn't go crazy on someone else's nickel, but I would also not think that it would be anything less than what we already have at the current golf course. So whatever that standard is, and I don't know what that is, and I'm assuming that the golf professional would make that determination, and the city would look at it, and Wasatch Educational would look at it, and I would expect that there would be a mutual agreement that this exceeds what we had wanted, or this is marginal, it has to be better. That would be that kind of conversation. Then it would be put out to public bid for construction.
Right. So what's the value of the Cooney property and the size of the Cooney property?
I don't know what the value is, but the size of it, it's about 21 to 22 acres. And because I don't think it was a part of the former landfill, although it could have been, I'm assuming that it has similar values in the area. And again, I don't know what's underneath it. So when our appraisals were completed on the north and the south wedge, it was appraised as if there were no challenges or concerns, because the appraiser, one, was not expert in what any of those subsurface expenses or challenges would be. So the instruction that they were given was to appraise it as if it were developable land. Developable land is a term of art that has a pretty big spectrum. I mean, anything is developable if you want to put enough money in it. So again, in part of the iterations of going back and forth on the value of the land, the city does have 2 appraisals. Wasatch Educational has been instructed that they may want to get their own appraisal. It's my understanding that they are having an appraisal done, and they've instructed their appraiser to then take construction information based on what they believe that costs will be, to bring this property to a suitable site for construction purpose, so dealing with extraordinary costs. It's very possible or likely that, and this is based on just past knowledge of when the Southgate project was being developed with Boyer and Target, that the value of putting into the ground exceeded the value of the land as it currently sat.
Okay, so if we didn't already own the Cooney's property, we would have to go out
We'd have to go acquire that.
for about 6.3 million.
Potentially, yeah, I guess we could, if that was appraised at that price, then yeah.
Okay, thanks.
While you're there, Dixon, concerning the Cooney property, is there any plan or has there been any idea on how to use that property besides a golf course?
Well, that's a discussion that I have with the administration pretty regularly. My position is if we're not going to move golf there, can we market it for similar uses to what's just up the road for other uses in the PIC zone in the East Bay community, which have been anywhere from warehouse and distribution to light manufacturing to data centers or whatever. If we're not going to develop it as a golf course, and if that decision could ever be made, and I'm not being critical of the administration, it's just back and forth. Not always, but there have been for the last, at least since 2006 or 7, a proposal on the golf course that then contemplated moving holes to it. And based on that, we have never really marketed it for commercial purposes because we were always holding it and the potentiality that it would go there. But if a definitive decision were made that just golf is not moving there or whatever, then we would seek to then attract a commercial development on the 22 acres.
So there's some value there for the city. If we move those 3 holes to that section, we're giving up that value. So we're not only giving up the cost of the holes to develop, which I think was estimated about $1 million a hole. I think this is what's been thrown around a little bit.
Okay.
And then if the valuation for what we're giving up in the 21 acres in the North Wedge is $6 million, it seems like we're really going into a negative negotiation in the city's standpoint.
Well, that's only if the North Wedge doesn't have any value when it's developed, because if it does have value when it's developed, then you could say that what could have been developed on the 21 acres on the Cooney property is now being developed and taxable and creating jobs and capital investment on the North Wedge. So in my mind, I'm just saying you're trading. But there's no doubt.
But not until it's developed. Land for land, we're not doing that.
That's correct. Right now, the Cooney property, because it is owned by the city, it's not being taxed, it's not generating any revenue.
Okay.
I don't, go ahead, George, and I'll follow.
You're the economic development director for the city,
So they keep telling me,
right?
yes.
And my understanding is from the meetings I've had with you and with the administration, with Mayor Curtis, they're in favor of medical school on the Wedge.
That's correct.
What will that do for East Bay?
So it does a couple of things. But first, I would say that having a golf course in our community is a positive benefit to the community. Impacting the golf course certainly has costs, but for the last 10 to 12 years, there have been proposals to do something commercially in the East Bay area on the golf course for the purpose of enhancing and improving economic opportunities in our community. Provo City is a landlocked community. To the north, south, east, and west, we have mountains, lakes, and communities. And so the land we have is what we have, and that could be an argument for preserving the golf course. It also could be an argument for developing the golf course. A medical school at this location, in my mind, signals that the city is willing and welcoming continued development. A medical school has a certain level of prestige to it that just doesn't happen. If we had 2 other medical schools in Utah County, I'm not sure that we would be standing here advocating to take out a portion of the golf course for another medical school. It's kind of a unique operator. It does bring capital investment, brings taxable investment, it does bring jobs, it brings students. All that vibrancy contributes to the economic picture of our community. It also sends a signal to other property owners in the area that are counting on and looking for people to come to an area like the mall, like the East Bay side of the shopping center on the east side where Sam's Club. That signals that the city is willing and wanting to have investment in their community and maintaining a viable golf course. And viable golf course, I get, that is in the eye of the beholder, but I would hope that through a design professional that we could maintain at least a standard currently to what we have now.
It's always been my view that for the next 15 years at least, we're going to have what we have now with the golf course and a medical school and medical facilities. So
Yes.
I don't think any of us would be willing to give up a golf course. We're not giving up a golf course. We're changing it, and there's going to be some impact. I think all of us realize that, but that's maybe the price of progress. I know the city fathers weren't willing to give up the downtown area, and the mall went to Orem years ago. And we know what that's done to retail in our city. We could have had the mall in Provo had we been foresightful enough. And I think this is a similar situation. We can still have the golf course, and we can have a fantastic world-class medical city. I have a grandson, probably most like his grandfather, that's at TCU this year studying to be a nurse, anesthesiologist, because there was nothing available in Utah or in this area for him. So I have a personal interest in seeing that. Well, I think that's well understood. Thank you.
Gary?
I know that there's always been some concern about building on the dump. And apparently the Rocky Mountain has made some studies and they feel comfortable, and that's their ball, that's going to be their thing from now on, like you said, and I believe that. Have we looked, but what they're going to do is going to affect us. Have we looked at that study that they have done, and are we comfortable? Our engineers, have they looked at it to determine whether what they're proposing can actually be done? I know they hope it can be done, and they feel comfortable that it can be done. Are we also comfortable that it can be done? Have we seen that study, I guess, is what I want to know. Can we have access to it?
We paid for a portion of that study. We can have our building department and our engineering department look at that. And certainly that would something that we would need to have done. I don't believe that, I'm pretty confident that has not happened yet. Again, this is a similar conversation that when we were dealing with Target and with the Boyer Company, it was a similar conversation as far as how to deal with what used to be there or the former use as a landfill. And again, Boyer Company and Target were confident that through proper engineering techniques and construction techniques that they could address. In fact, at the time that we were dealing with this, Target had just built one of their facilities on a landfill in another community. East Coast, that was what they had related to us, and so they were not concerned. They were willing to go forward until we missed the construction season, and then they took their investment to Canada. But we can certainly have our building department and our engineering department take a look at the geotechnical study.
I just don't, I want to avoid the oops factor.
I'm with you. Yep, we don't want that.
We are still at the beginning of the public process, so I don't feel any, strong need to come to a decision right now. I think we're 50 minutes behind, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but I'm willing to wait for the answers. First, I would like to commend both groups on great presentations today. Hope you can see and the public sees that this question is weighing heavily on the council. But if we take a step back, this really is a good problem to have. We're choosing between two great options, and that is, I'm very grateful that that's the type of problems that we're looking at and dealing with today. I guess there are some other problems that are not nearly as nice. To the Parks and Rec,
I'd say that there's no question that the East Bay Golf Course is a great amenity to the community. You guys have done a wonderful job managing it and providing the city with a great value. When we talk about a win-win, I'm looking at this and wondering if it's a situation, for another cliche, that where we might have our cake and eat it too. You presented the wonderful work that you're doing. What I need to understand is, and we've alluded to it a little bit, but your presentation has been mostly, these are the great things that we're doing, and there's no question they're great things, but what do we actually lose in phase one? What do we actually lose in phase two? Do we lose the cross-country tournaments? At what point do we lose the golf tournaments? Are we really going to lose? And I guess some of this has already been answered, but are we actually going to lose the junior/executive course? And what can we do in those 15 years to try to prepare for that? What is the impact of this proposal on the open space, the wetlands, the wildlife that you presented? Are we still going to have some wildlife? Are we still going to have some wetlands? Are we still, again, your presentation was great, and I love what we're doing there, but how does this proposal directly affect that? What are we giving up? I need to understand that a little bit better. And again, I'd look for these answers at a later point. And then finally, there's been a lot of questions that have been brought up about the terms of the deal. I haven't received the details yet, so I look forward to getting those details and some presentations on the nuts and bolts of the proposal. But I imagine we're not going to get into that today. So thank you, and thank you to everyone. It's wonderful to be a part of this community and the people that are so passionate about the great quality of life we have here.
If that's the end of our questions, we need to move on. Yes, Cliff.
So staff has some thoughts and some questions on the public process going forward and looking for some input. It's our plan to take today's broadcast and make it available on our websites, our blogs, our Open City Hall, et cetera, to make it out there. The question's been raised as to the thinking is, and question is whether or not to have this as a public input item on December 5th at the next regular council meeting. But staff is asking me the same questions, and so the question to the council is, what do you see the process from today going forward for the next couple of weeks, couple of months? That's some direction we're asking for the council at work session to give us some guidance.
Yes, Dave.
My thought was that the first round of public input would be on December 5th. I think we had discussed that. And then at that time, depending on how the council felt, if there was sufficient input, interest in continuing that, then we would schedule the surplus for January 9th, and then have another round of public input and make the decision, or potentially continue it again if we weren't ready to make a decision at that point.
Does council have any concern about us publishing all this material on Open City Hall or other forums? Okay.
So, yes, Wayne.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me just, we haven't really talked about the specifics of how the decision gets made, and so maybe it would be helpful to do that. So because this property is in the ownership of Provo City, the law requires that we go through a formal public hearing process to declare the property surplus. That's a regulated statutory process that we need to go through given the value of the land. And so we do need to have a 14-day notice statutorily for the formal public hearing at which the council might make a decision on surplusing. And so, so there are a variety of ways that could happen. We currently have as you indicated, a normal council meeting on the 5th of December. We don't have 14 days notice. If you wanted to hold the surplusing hearing that night, we couldn't do that. There's not sufficient time to get the noticing through. So a couple of options that have been considered, and I've heard various council members suggest, is if you wanted to hold the surplusing meeting, if you had enough information now that you felt like you could be ready for a surplusing decision before the end of the year, you could schedule a special council meeting that would meet the 14-day notice. And so if, for example, you felt comfortable enough to move forward with setting a surplusing date, then the first possibility of doing that would be a special council meeting on the 12th of December. Absent that, unless you wanted to meet the week before Christmas, which council has traditionally avoided, then the first regular meeting that's been scheduled for the council would be the 9th of December. But I'm sorry, 9th of January. Boy, this has been a long day. And so 9th of January would be the next regularly scheduled meeting. So, and again, to get 14 days notice back from that, you'd probably have to make a decision to schedule that surplusing on the 5th or potentially the 12th. So there is a path to getting to a public hearing before the holidays if there's concern about losing momentum in one direction or the other. But again, the default probably would be going to absent any further direction from the council, be holding public input on the 5th and then making a decision to schedule a surplus meeting thereafter. But you could reach that decision today if you felt you had you would have enough information to make a decision by December 12th.
I would like to have scheduled a meeting on the 12th of December, but I couldn't find enough votes to do that. So,
and that's fine. We're again, as we've indicated, the process, any process of surplusing a piece of city property for development or redevelopment is a value question. Value questions are what city councils do best. That's why the voters put you in office, is to make those value determinations. And so there's value on both sides of this equation. It's a balancing act, and you have to conclude on which side the value is predominant. And and whatever process it takes you to get there is the process that we'd like to see you follow. So again, whatever you're comfortable with is from the administration side is fine with us.
Yes, George.
yeah, my thought was the current council has been involved in this. It'd be nice for us to be able to make the decision with the current council, but
certainly some value to that.
Certainly some value in that, but there's also value in public input. And I think
Totally agree.
the consensus was there hasn't been enough public input, enough time for public input, and it would be best to do it in January.
Okay. Just want to make sure you were aware of the options available to you.
Unless some other council members would like to say they'd like to do it on the 12th of December, I'll finish.
Gary?
What is if I remember, all we're doing, if we did something like that, I'm not ready, I am no way ready to accept an offer at this point.
Right. No, and we wouldn't think you would be.
And so on the 12th, if we're saying we're going to consider selling it, is all. I'm not, what does it entail to put it up for public sale, and what does that, I don't want to reflect to the public that we're selling the golf course.
Right.
All I would want to do is say, yeah, we're talking.
Yeah. So again, that it sort of depends on your level of comfort, and not necessarily about the deal, but about whether you're ready to hold a public hearing to consider surplusing it. Now, typically, the decision to surplus is the decision to surplus belongs to the council. The execution of the agreement is an administrative action, executive function, and so but again, we feel confident that you're not going to be ready to surplus the property unless you understand the terms and agree to them, or want to suggest other terms that would be agreeable to you if that exists. And so again, we would fully expect that the decision to surplus would be accompanied with conditions for the mayor, whoever that is at the time, will execute that process. So again, it depends on when and what you have a comfort level with.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I add something to that? Under our city ordinance, there's actually two different ways that you can surplus property I'll put it that way, two different ways that you can surplus property. One is that the city ordinance lays out certain terms that must be met for selling any property that is on the surplus property list unless the resolution surplusing the property says otherwise. The practical effect of that is that one method of surplusing property is you can simply name a piece of property in the city that the city owns and wants to sell and put it on the surplus property list. If you do that, the administration can actually execute the sale of the property as long as they do so under the guidelines of the ordinance without ever coming back to you, okay? The other way, which is probably more common, at least in recent years, is for the administration to come to you with the proposed deal first before you ever even add it to the surplus property, and you accept by resolution placing it on the surplus property and the terms of the deal at the same time. And so you can do either one of those, but I just wanted to make it clear that if you do surplus the property, if you just simply add the property to the surplus property list without a specific deal being in place, it can be sold by the administration, but only in accordance with the terms and criteria of the ordinance.
Thank you.
And just to follow up, just a quick one. I am excited about a medical school potentially being here in Provo, and I'm very excited about our golf course. I've been on the Parks and Rec board, and it's a wonderful place, and I think we need to hear from our board members on this also. I noticed several of them here today, and they have not had a chance to really weigh in on this, and I'd appreciate them having the opportunity to talk about the things that they'd like to hear. We need more input from the citizens, I think, at this point, but I hope that this does not signal that I'm ready to give up on this medical school, because I like the golf course too. I really hope we can work something out where we can get these things working together.
We'd be happy to ask the Parks and Recreation Board to weigh in if you'd like.
Okay, does that bring it to a conclusion so we can say thank you to you all and move on to our next item? Okay.
These good things, two good things. So let's.
Let's see. We're going to have a 5-minute break and then continue with item number 2.
I'll send these notice to Karen. Thanks, that'd be great. There it is. Oh, no, that's.
Just about. Kay's, yeah, we could start at 3:10 like schedule says, so I'm going to give him a couple more minutes. Really big deal. So,
And especially where the performance is built into it.
okay, we would like to continue with our council meeting, and we are going to move to item 8 on the agenda, a discussion on the proposed 2018 council meeting calendar and the timing of council meetings. Cliff, do you have, yes, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I'll be talking about the 2018 council meeting calendar. So there's a draft of that up here on the screen. I just bring your attention. So as closely as possible, we've tried to stick with the first and third Tuesday tradition, but Cliff will talk about some of the code changes relative to that in a few minutes. So there are a few deviations that you'll note, and so where possible, we've tried to avoid scheduling meetings, working council meetings that coincide with major holidays or fall on the day after a major holiday closure, holiday which for which city offices are closed, like Labor Day and Memorial Day, 4th of July, those types of things. We've also avoided the primary and general election dates, and then Provo school district breaks. So this is the calendar that we would propose. If any council members have questions or concerns about any of the dates, I'm happy to go into a little more detail, but that kind of just lays things out.
The only question I had on that was, will there be a primary election that we might want to avoid?
Yes, the primary election is in June. If you'll note, June 26th, the primary election is, yeah.
That's a lot earlier than usual.
There's not municipal elections, so
Okay.
the primary, yeah. The state election website lists June 26th and November 6th as the primary general,
Thank you for
respectively.
pointing it out. I missed it the first time through.
Yeah, and along with that, there's no board of canvassers as there's not municipal elections.
On the January 2nd meeting, that's just the inauguration only. We're not going to have council business.
No, we are not planning to have a full council meeting. So again, pertaining to the code changes that Cliff will talk about, the election of the chair and vice chair may or may not occur on that date, but as far as official council business, that will be deferred until January 9th when the regular meeting is scheduled.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So, council members, we haven't picked a date yet, but we're looking at some dates in May. We're thinking about maybe May 22nd and picking that for a budget retreat, and we'll work another date. But we're going to try and get you a couple of dates set up early so that city staff can plan around that and council can plan around that well in advance. Moving on from this, can you bring up the ordinance? So we talked about a couple of code changes that we thought were necessary. If you look to the bottom left of your screen, you'll see at the first regular municipal council meeting on the first Tuesday of each year. So the existing language is on the first Tuesday of each year, council shall elect one of its members to be the chair. As we looked at the calendar this year, of course, the first Tuesday is the second. We thought that that made more sense to have the inaugural and not necessarily that election. But next year, January 1st is the first Tuesday. And because we keep running into this first and third issues, both these changes that we're proposing are would allow us the flexibility. And so what we would do with this first part is that just the first regular council meeting of the year is when the council chair would be elected. And then on the second part, in part two, you'll see that we're getting rid of the language of first and third weeks, which is our traditional and by city code are the dates that we try to have them. We'll continue to try to have them, but as you can see with the calendar, one of the things we found with staff is when we have a regular council meeting the day after a holiday, it's really difficult to get everything prepped up for you, and so those are some of the thinking that we had, and we suggest that you go with these changes. In practice, we'll still try to work with a first and third, but as you'll see, that sometimes it just works out nicer if we move it a little bit. And so this year, for example, you'll end up with pretty much most months and every other week schedule to attend council meetings. And this will be on the agenda tonight if you're okay with that.
And then you will send those dates to us so that we can also get them on our calendars, right? I appreciate
Yes, we'll have them both. Once the council passes this resolution about the ordinance and then the resolution to adopt the calendar, we are good to go, and we'll have it on the city calendar, and we'll make sure you have that list so you can put it on your personal calendars. Do you have any questions for us?
So that is on the schedule already for tonight?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm really happy to support your schedule for next year, for 2018. Super happy to support it. I was just wondering if you want to be specific about Tuesdays and 5:30 in the event that future meetings are not on Tuesdays or not at 5:30. Do you want to be that specific if we're changing it now? I don't know, just a thought.
We hadn't contemplated any change to that, and it would be a simple matter to change it if we wanted to, but it's up to council. It's been that way for some time, and it's up to council if they want to amend that. So unless you give us some guidance, we haven't proposed it.
I guess I would just add to that and say that the entire section is probably not really necessary in the sense that there's already state law that governs the fact that we have to publish a calendar once a year. But historically, it's been in the code in order to try to give, I think, the public a preview or an expectation of when the meetings have been. So our attempt in drafting this language was to simply modify it as little as necessary to provide flexibility, but we could go even further in modifying it for sure.
Dave?
I'm surprised that Ms. Santiago doesn't move that we meet every week next year.
I think it's safe to say that we'd welcome a seat in the front for her anytime.
Okay, so we don't need to take any action at
No
this
action
time.
at this time unless you wanted to change the language now, but otherwise it'll come as is to council tonight.
Okay. Are we ready to go back and
Yeah, Brian Torgerson's
pick
here.
up where we left off? A discussion on a proposed text amendment to Title 11 regarding sanitation services?
Thank you for adjusting. So a little bit on this. This is nothing new. We came to the council several weeks ago. We were tasked with wordsmithing the ordinance amendment. We've done that. We've gone through legal as well as Mr. Jones. We feel like we've got that to a good place. So again, this was brought about with some questions about
is Provo City able to require each residence to have a garbage can? And our legal team reviewed that, gave us the opinion that they didn't think so. So this amendment is proposed to fix that so that we do have the ability to require a minimum amount of garbage service on residential units, as well as commercial for that matter. But again, this is just a slide showing the response from legal that we got when we asked the question. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly unless you have questions or you've seen it before. It does establish a minimum amount, which is based on our smallest can that we do service. So again, it just requires that each residence have at least a garbage can, unless they choose other services as well. So, yes.
So I had a question on that. So like, for example, in a fourplex with 4 units, would this require them to have 4 cans of that size, or could they have 2 or 3 if they felt that was all that was needed?
They're required to have 95 gallons per unit. The owner of that facility is welcome to contract with a private hauler or a commercial hauler and be provided that minimum amount in a dumpster or a roll-off or whatever it may be. But it would, if it is curbside, it would be 4 cans, or at least they would be responsible to pay for 4 cans.
So just to follow up, as an example, I've got a message from a constituent here that does have a fourplex, and there's 20 people living in it, and he currently uses 3 trash cans and 1 recycling can, and he hasn't had a problem with it not being enough capacity. So
I think the discussion we've gotten into is kind of goes back to the financing and the budget part of things, where the black can is what we use to subsidize much of our other services, such as yard waste and recycling. That's really our only, if we don't require everyone to have a black can, then that may have some domino effect where large condo complexes or apartment complexes try and cut back on the number of cans being serviced, and could impact the budget as far as the sanitation program as a whole goes. So this is an effort to ensure participation in our, for example, they may not be, the idea is to help capture costs for other services that we do in sanitation that are not paid for otherwise, such as your Christmas trees, your fall cleanup, those sorts of services that are not, we don't charge for, but it is a service that we provide. And again, it's just ensuring participation equitably through all the residents in Provo.
Brian, what's the process for people that have, for a fourplex that maybe has a dumpster for that? What's the process of so that they don't get charged for this because they're already paying for a dumpster?
Okay. So the proposed amendment does say that unless you have contracted with a commercial hauler, then you are required to pay for garbage service. Now,
so do we bring proof of payment into to the city, or how does that go?
Turn to Bryce on that one. Bryce, do you have any information on how that?
The only source we'd go out. We had a
Can you come up and tell us?
At present, we've been under the idea for a long time that we already had this in place, where every unit had to have a single can or contract it. So just this year, we had one that fought it legally, said, hey, look, took it to legal, and legal said, hey, look, you don't have the position to stand on. So that's why we're going back and fixing the wording. But we've consistently, through the last few years, told everybody, look, 1 can per unit per, you have a fourplex, it's 4 cans. So that's been our standard that we've done for the last, at least for the last 4 years. I've been here and longer than that, before that. On the actual commercial cans, our intent is not to go out and start verifying, hey, look, you need an extra can, you need an extra can, or you need more trash service. It's simply a tool when we have an issue where there's excess trash on the ground, when there's a problem, that's a tool that gives us something to actually hold, to get it corrected, if that makes sense. So our intent is not to go out and retroactively go to everybody and say, you need another can, or you need more service.
So Bryce, to answer Mr. Winterton's question, if he has contracted with a commercial hauler, is it just a simple phone call to customer service?
It would just be on site, as long as there's a can on site. We're not interested in seeing, it's not our intent to make a bunch of paperwork for people. It's simply our intent that if we show up on site, a lot of times we get a complaint from residents at one apartment complex saying, hey, look, they're coming over and dumping on our can's getting filled up. They don't have one. We'll go out, look on site to see if there's a can on site, and then that's when we have the conversation with the landlord, saying, hey, look, it looks like you don't have a can on site. Your neighbors are getting done, you're putting all your waste in your neighbor's can. You guys need to get one. And that's been the history of what we've done with it.
Complaint-based then.
Complaint-based.
Basically.
But to answer your question, I don't think we require a proof of dumpster. Typically, you would be signing up for service at a commercial. It's either curbside. Provo City does not collect front load commercial. So you either have a curbside or you don't. And so if you have curbside, you'd be charged. Again, this does handle some of that minimum requirement for commercial and high density housing, but this is mainly really hits the residential curbside collection. But it does have the language in there that does provide for a minimum amount on a dumpster service or roll off or whatever it may be. Are there any other questions related to the proposed text amendment?
Did that address your concerns, Dave?
Not really. I'm struggling a little bit with requiring people to have more capacity than they need. So.
And it just sounds like they're not going to go around and necessarily count and require anyone to do anything different than they are doing now, unless there's clearly a problem, there's garbage spread around, or like you say, somebody's abusing someone else's dumpster because they don't have sufficient, then it becomes a complaint.
Correct. Yeah, it would not be a lot of times we don't know how many units are in the complex anyway, unless we actually go out with the intent of finding out how many units and how many cans are being picked up. So I don't think it's something we're looking to persecute our residents with. It's just a measure to protect us when particularly these HOA properties think they can get away with having 1 can for 4 units or whatever. And if, in fact, that was one of the comments that kind of the road we were headed down with this, the question that we got, and we had legal review that, so.
I kind of view this as the same as our UTF fund. I don't own a car. Why do I have to pay for the roads? I think everybody has garbage. Sorry, you do. And so I think that it's one of those things that we need to take care of, even if you don't leave the house.
Dave?
I was kind of waiting until after the public comment section, so we would have the discussion among council members. I'm being in this room, I'm kind of in that mindset. Mr. Sewell, I also have some concerns about a minimum of 95, which might be a good average, but I worry that it might be too large for some large situations, large apartments or certain living situations. I do support requiring 1 can per unit for the curbside, but for the dumpster roll off, those kind of situations, I would be interested in having more flexibility. There may be a nursing home or even if it's independent living, but there may be situations where requiring that capacity is overkill. And I understand the idea of complaint based and all that, but I feel strongly that we should be, I feel strongly in the rule of law, and I feel that we shouldn't pass laws that are unreasonable with the expectation that, well, if people find them unreasonable, they just won't follow them, and it won't be a problem unless there's a complaint, kind of thing. So I would be interested in, I guess for you, we talked last time that there are places where there's garbage all over the ground, and in those situations you find that the capacity is well below what you think it should be. Do we have any idea, does that happen when there's 50 cubic feet per resident per week or per unit per week? Is that 30? Is that 70? Is that 95 that we find that if residential, if we don't get 95 cubic feet per unit, then we're finding garbage on the ground? Where does that need to be?
So, to answer your question, Mr. Harding, I don't know that there's anything magical about 95 gallons. What's magic about it is that's the size of our black can. Now, if you would like us to split that out, I think we're open to looking at something like that. I think we're trying to simplify the code, but I understand your concern. Again, there's nothing necessarily magical. There's nothing that we've done scientifically to determine that 95 per unit is appropriate. Again, probably largely based on the curbside pickup. And maybe we just clarify that this 95 gallons is for curbside pickup. Some of the comments that Mr. Jones has indicated is that we really already have the ability to go back on those, or at least it appears we have that authority to go back and require additional service where garbage may be laying on the ground or whatever. So I don't know if that helps at all. Like I say, I think we may have tried to do too much of a catch-all in the code where we felt like it maybe served a dual purpose, but maybe it's too specific.
What I think you're proposing, you're talking about, I would fully embrace. It sounds to me like if it's curbside, it has to be picked up by Provo City. And if it's being picked up by Provo City, it has to be our cans, and our cans are 95. And if it's not curbside, then we already have the ability to make sure people don't have trash lying around. So to me, there's no value in having that 95 in the code. And so if Public Works is willing to remove that, that would alleviate my concern completely. And I do support, if there's a fourplex and they're having curbside, I think that I fully support that concept of you need to pay for a can, even if you're not using it to capacity. So I fully support that, but yeah, that would resolve all of my concerns.
Yeah, let me probably just weigh in there and clarify that, because I think that's a great question. So in 11.01.050, there's a list of unlawful acts regarding solid waste disposal, and it says, so our code already says it shall be unlawful and constitute a Class B misdemeanor for a person And then subsection 13 says, for the owner of a structure to fail or refuse to contract for sufficient refuse waste service from Provo City or a licensed commercial hauler to remove all refuse waste generated at the structure with respect to which the person is an owner. So that was one of the comments. As I turn that off, that was one of the comments that I had made to Public Works, is that in my view, the minimum 95-gallon thing, its purpose really, subject to them, clarifying this or pointing out something I misunderstood. Its purpose really is probably just to make it even easier to enforce the section that I just read, because for the section that I've just read, you would have to, you'd have to prove that whatever they had contracted for was insufficient, whereas the language they've added to subsection 2 creates a minimum presumption, right? So that you no longer have to prove the actual insufficiency, you just have to say it didn't meet the standard. So I think you could enforce it either way. It's just a policy question of which way you decide to enforce.
I don't know what procedure you use, but it would seem logical that if someone had insufficient, that you would inform them of the standard and at the same time say, well, the reality is if you contract for something that is bigger than what you have now, but not necessarily the full size as per 95 gallons times each dwelling, that to me, the object is to not have garbage on the ground. It's not to force everyone to reach the 95-gallon number, because if you can achieve compliance with the law without going to that larger, who knows what size dumpster or roll-off, then I think you've satisfied the intent.
Sure.
So does that help, Dave? If it's not like I think they're going to go out there and require every dumpster at every apartment house to be a multiple of 95, because that may not be needed. But if whatever they're doing now isn't working, then they need something bigger. And you have to have some standard to say, yours is not big enough, and we could require you to have it up to 95, but the object is just have it big enough so it's not overfilled or flowing.
Yeah, I agree. It needs to be big enough. That to me is what's important. But if we say we require you to have 95, my expectation is, to be a good citizen, you need to have a 95 per unit per week. And I don't feel good about putting stuff in and then turning around and saying, well, you don't actually need to do this. So I would support either leaving the law as it is, which says it needs to be sufficient. Of course, that does get a little squishy on enforcement. I don't know how widespread this problem is for Public Works, but I'd support either leaving it how it is or picking a minimum that is reasonable. And I think 95 is great for our cans. I think that's great, but I think that's kind of an average, and there may be situations where that's excessive. And so, if it's a minimum, I think it should be a minimum. Maybe that's 50, maybe that's 70.
So perhaps a different minimum for apartments.
Right.
So I think this has been said before. I think Bryce mentioned this. Where we do not do commercial collection, we're really not seeing dumpsters and the lack of capacity necessarily. That would be from a resident or someone calling and complaining. So the chances of us really policing, and I think this is probably part of your concern, I don't think we're actively looking for garbage spilling out on the ground. However, if one of our drivers sees something, in their residential routes, they may bring it up. But where we don't service those commercial dumpsters, it's not likely that we would even know if they're under capacity. And so, again, it's largely complaint-based. And to Mr. Jones' point, then that does give us some teeth, I guess, to say, hey, you're not meeting this standard. Whereas right now we'd say, hey, you don't have enough, and so how much do I need? So it may eliminate some of that back and forth and anyway.
What if we just said that you needed to provide a minimum of one standard 95-gallon can per dwelling?
Well,
And then you're talking about the can more than you are the amount of the refuse, right?
The only problem with that is that this sentence is not really aimed at the curbside. It's really aimed at those who have contracted to use something other than Provo City, which is not curbside, because they can't contract away curbside. So it's really aimed at apartments and commercial collection.
Now,
But you're saying you don't
along
want
the
to.
lines of what you're saying, Ms. Santiago, if you were to move this sentence up in the paragraph and reword it, such as saying something like, for curbside collection, the owner of dwelling shall provide a minute, and that basically is just calling out residential curbside service. I don't know, Mr. Jones, if that would be.
Well, but
But it doesn't help us on the commercial
Go back
side.
to the point that, from my perspective, I don't see any reason to even state a minimum for residential, because if they're doing curbside, it has to be through Provo City, and they're using our cans, and so our cans are. So in my mind, the only purpose for the sentence is for those who are not using curbside. So then the question becomes, do you need a minimum to enforce adequate capacity for the people that are not doing curbside?
One of the issues, and the reason that we asked for this here is one of the issues that, and it's been touched upon. It's really, really hard to enforce when there's trash laying on the ground. I have one particular case right now that kind of is the reason for this here. And they're a habitual problem. And I've been talking to Ace, and I've been talking to the landlord, and it's going back and forth, and it's been over about 6 months where every other week it's on the ground. I'll go back the next week and it'll be cleaned up. And Ace will say, well, our guy's cleaning it up. Well, their guy cleans it up when they get there, but the day before it's on the ground. The landlord's saying, well, I have sufficient because most of the time it works, but it doesn't work all of the time. And so that's why we had the wording in it, so that we could have something to say, this is what we require is sufficient. We don't really have, as a public works, we don't, we don't care what size it is, as long as it meets that ability for us to enforce a health issue with regards to trash being on the ground and kids running around in the area.
So are these cans overflowing, or is this a dumpster? They're cans. They're just from one complex.
So they get serviced on Wednesday morning. I'll drive by Tuesday, and there's trash scattered 5 feet each side of the garbage can.
Are we talking city cans, or are we
No,
talking
I'm
dumpsters?
sorry, this is a commercial dumpster that's serviced by Ace Services, so Ace Disposal. This isn't ours. It's not a 95 garbage can. It's a big dumpster that's serviced by Ace. And that's kind of that is an example of why we were asking for this.
Okay, but you're dumping it, they're dumping it, Ace is dumping it.
Ace is dumping it.
But they're complaining to the city that the
residents around that apartment complex are complaining because
About that
it's spilling
particular
out
one.
on, it's out next to the sidewalk, it's spilling out onto the sidewalk. And, their kids are running up the street on the sidewalk through the trash that's from this.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood, thank you.
That's the reason we asked for it.
So Brian, at what point could we fine them? Instead of trying to make this definition, say you've got garbage on the thing and it happens 2 weeks in a row, it's a $500 fine.
Right.
Or
Well,
something
that's
like
the
that.
question, right? Is because it's a criminal offense. It's got a standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You've got to convince the judge, right? So potentially even a jury if they demand a jury trial. So the question becomes, how much evidence would you need standing in front of a jury to convince a jury that they had refused or failed to contract for sufficient capacity if there's no minimum standard, right? And so The question becomes, as Bryce just pointed out, if it's on the ground once, is that enough to convince a jury or not? And I don't know the answer to that question. While I've got the mic, Mr. Decker just proposed some alternate language. Kelsey, can you go back to the previous page? That may or may not resolve the issue. And Mr. Decker, you'll have to correct me if I get this wrong, but I think the proposal was, regardless of a collection method, the owner of any dwelling may be required by the Public Works Department to provide a minimum of 95 gallons of refuse waste capacity per week for each dwelling. And we could even add something to the end of the sentence like, in order to meet the requirements of, and we could refer to that subsection 13 that I just quoted. That makes it not an automatic mandatory minimum for everybody that people would be violating the law if they didn't fulfill, but would allow Public Works to, anytime there was a complaint, go to the person and say, based on this complaint, we're going to require you to now meet this minimum. So,
Love it. Wonderful, wonderful suggestion. Love it.
Do you need a motion to amend your?
Yes.
I so move that we amend it as you just stated.
Okay.
I will happily second.
Just a question, since we got the second. So will we have to define then, is it the first time you get a complaint and you go out and say now you have to have a 95-gallon, or the second complaint, or?
Well, that's the question for the council, in, not to put it too bluntly, but how much they trust the Public Works Department, right? Because the language I just proposed would allow the Public Works Department to demand the 95 gallons whenever they felt like it was appropriate. And then the question becomes for the council as a policy issue, how much confidence do you have in that power not being abused?
And how would that be enforced then? If it goes the same route, then they refuse to get a 95-gallon container and they keep having garbage, then do we go to the same court?
Yeah, but in my mind, it becomes much easier because I would see that playing out as the first time they get a complaint, Public Works goes out and says, under this ordinance that we're considering right now, you are required to have 95 gallons in order to meet that requirement. Then the instant that they refused to or failed to upgrade to the 95-gallon minimum, they could be prosecuted under this ordinance rather than the other ordinance. And the only question for the jury would be, did they fail to provide a minimum of 95 gallons after being instructed to by Public Works?
Okay, so we have a motion by George Stewart and a second by Dave Harding. Are we ready to vote on that? Yes, Dave.
Just one other question. So I understand the 95 gallons is coming from, the size of our black cans. Do we have any statistics on, well, I think this may be something that Mr. Harding already asked, but do we have any statistics on in a typical situation where private service is being contracted, what the average gallon per unit on those is?
I think we could probably compile that information based off of our number of cans serviced, the tonnage being dumped at the transfer station. Yeah, I think we could come up with that, but I don't know.
We could come up with something on our own numbers, but commercially, we're not doing a lot of the big apartment complexes, dorms and stuff like that. We don't handle it now, so we wouldn't have that data to even go out and say, hey, look, this is what the average is in this type of environment. I can tell you what our numbers are, but I can't tell you necessarily what commercial is as a whole, because that's, we just don't service it, so we don't have any data on that itself.
So if you're asking about the residential can, I think we can come up with that data ourselves.
Well, I wasn't really asking about the residential can, but I'm just wondering, because a lot of these situations where they get service privately would be apartment complexes, and some of them may have a lot of one-bedroom units and things, and I'm just wondering if the average would be a lot lower than 95. I mean, would we be requiring them maybe to get to double or triple what they to go way beyond what would be needed? That's my question.
Well, I think that be the benefit of the may require you up to 95 gallons, because then the only time that would be even enforced would be if there's a habitual problem or a problem that comes up. So then we'd actually be basing it on an issue versus just a random number, but we'd actually be looking at only if they're not being serviced enough.
I like the up to phrase in there because, of course, I haven't seen the modified language that has been suggested yet. But right now, the way it's worded, if you hit that trigger, then you would require the minimum of 95. And I would hope that we would word this in such a way, and that your practice would be that you would only require what was needed.
Right, and I think the purpose of the 95 is to actually give us a number that we can match. Or it's hard to tell you what a volume is that you need when you don't have when there's nothing, there's no basis to it, and that's the point.
Yes.
So the way I kind of saw this playing out is you might have a complaint, and sanitation comes out and says it appears that you're not providing sufficient capacity. We have the ability to require you to do 95 gallons. I was saying cubic feet earlier. Apologize. 95 gallons. Get this taken care of, or we're going to require that. And then maybe on the second complaint, now they come back. You haven't taken care of it. Anyways, something that it becomes a negotiation possibly that where, we're gonna, and they say, well, we think 95 is too much, but we'll do 70, and then the city says, okay, if that's sufficient, that's fine, but if you don't take care of it, we will make you do 95, and maybe they don't do it again, and okay, now you're at 95, and you have to pay for this, and they say, okay, well, how about we do this for 6 months, and if we really can show that this is more than we need, then we'll go on a kind of a trial to drop down below or something. But anyway, so that's kind of how I hope that this would play out, that it is kind of that stick, but we're not. I really love the idea that may require, but the up to, I would support that as well. That gives you the tool that you can say, for your setup, we really think that 75 is going to be sufficient, so we will now require you to do 75, but there is that cap at 95. We can't require more than 95. So I think that's great.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, but on which language? We have language up here now saying up to. Was that the motion?
That was what I understood. I think I said that the first time, but then when I actually typed it in, I left that out. So that's why I had Kelsey add it. So this is what I recall being the language that I proposed that the motion was about. But please review it and make sure I haven't made any mistakes.
So it says may and up to. Just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with what they are voting on.
Are you comfortable with it?
I believe we are.
It's my motion.
All right. I think we're good.
My second stands.
All right. All in favor of the ordinance? And that's unanimous.
Now, what we're voting on, we're not voting on the ordinance itself, or the language.
The language.
To present tonight.
Yes. Correct.
So having passed, this will now be the language that will be the subject of the implied motion this evening.
Thank you.
So moved.
Thank you for working with us to get it right.
Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to announce that items 2, 3, and 6 have been continued, and we're moving on to item 5, a presentation from Finance on operating budget carryovers.
Thank you, council members. I have a Excel document that has the detail of the operating carryovers. It's been a regular tradition to share with the council these types of carryovers, but actually included in this year's budget ordinance was a specific provision to review this with you during this meeting. So I was planning on just going through kind of by department and hitting some high points, but if the council has any specific questions, I'd be happy to address them. Some of them I might have to do additional research on, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. It's organized by department. You can see in the mayor's office, there's about $63,000 of carryovers. A number of those are related to furniture and equipment, and also the wayfinding dollars that were carried over from economic development. So those are dollars that were previously appropriated that are now being carried over in the new parking division within the mayor's office for that wayfinding amount. Engineering has requested to carry over $121,000 for street improvements. The municipal council, that $50,000 line item was the amount that was appropriated through the budget cycle last year for budgeting the priorities. Professional services, I believe, is for legal services, among some other minor items. The Parks and Recreation Department has a number of carryovers. A lot of those are related to existing POs, purchase orders that they have. The single largest item is that exercise equipment. That's the capital replacement fund for the recreation center. And then the utility carryover is due to some savings they had on a mild spring that we're using to cover some utility costs in the new fiscal year. The recorder has only the election costs related to the vote by mail initiative that we appropriated and carried over to pay for the election, which was now complete in this new fiscal year, excuse me. Human Resources has a number of carryovers. Some of it is related to Provo 360, that they have some contract service dollars that were previously allocated to accommodate some changes, and that they're carrying over those dollars should we need them to make some changes to our other systems to accommodate Provo 360. There's some other buyouts and HR payroll changes, yes. So because Gary Bushman was appointed as the, I don't know, what is Gary's? He's managing, he's a project manager, right? A project manager for Provo 360. Daniel Softy was the acting director of the Division of Human Resources. He's now actually the director. Gary's vacated that post. So we're covering kind of the difference in that pay and then the difference of backfilling his position with a position that was previously only contract for a set amount of time. So it's kind of related to all of those juggling.
The only other thing I would add is that Gary Bushman has announced that he's going to retire, and he's finishing up with the Provo 360 project, and he's going to retire sometime between the end of March and the end of June. And so with that announcement, the decision was made by administration to go ahead and fill the division director position that Daniel Softly was acting in. And so we opened up the recruitment, and he came out top and was selected. And our current budget had him at a lower wage because he wasn't at that position. And so that's just the difference for the rest of this year.
Finance has a few carryovers related to potential overtime needed for future phases of Provo 360, as well as recognition associated with that, and then travel for Provo 360 or the Kayenta conference, which was just recently completed this last week. Legal had no carryovers. Information Systems has a sizable carryover. This has been an ongoing carryover. We tend to carry over large amounts of money in Information Systems, specifically because they have so many expensive licenses that increase year over year, and large infrastructure investments that are required to keep us constantly up to date. I think that we could provide a more significant breakdown of how those equipment are expensed, but it would be a lot of very specific technology-oriented detail. So if the council is interested in diving into that, we could provide it.
Just help me understand, I guess, carryovers a little bit. Is this almost like a contingency that we set some money aside in case things broke down this year? It didn't break down, so we want to carry that money so it's there in case it breaks down next year?
So largely, all of these carryovers exist because there's unspent excess funds within a department. And I think the overall intention of providing this I don't know, I want to call it a service to the departments, is to prevent the kind of last year scramble to just spend your money, right? Use it or lose it. So instead, the mayor has elected, and finance, and we've worked with the council on this method of carrying over money. There's a number of different reasons why a department would carry over money. Some of them, yes, it's a contingency that I think that there's a streets one or engineering that they regularly have a contingency fund for unexpected repairs or street signs that they need. And so in that case, it's a contingency. In this case, it's a variety of needs that IS has, whether it's purchasing upgrades. We have an upgrade schedule that they like to maintain, and this is one of the ways that they maintain it, among other unexpected needs that they have for outside contracting services if we have to hire someone to do other tasks that we don't have in-house, or there's, like I said, so sometimes there's an open PO, sometimes there's a specific task, sometimes it's contingency, and other times it's filling kind of operational needs that aren't filled through the normal budgeting process. And that's the case in the police, right? That when we do the annual budgeting process for the police department, we agreed to fund additional activities up to a certain amount, but they had a much larger list than we were able to provide. So rather than saying no to anything, we allowed them to carry over every cent that they had left in their budget to help pay for some of the things that they would have liked to included in their annual budget. And a lot of departments will use that if they have excess savings in payroll or other areas, they'll kind of earmark it for the things that they would have increased their annual budget to cover. Does that answer your question?
Mostly. I guess, I mean, we're approaching $500,000 in IS, and it sounds like we do that year after year.
This year, I think, is a little larger than normal, but it usually is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we carry over. And their operation is not inexpensive. I believe it's over $1 million that their operation regularly operates. And some would argue that it's underfunded, like many of the departments would argue that they would like more.
Right.
So
I guess I'm just trying to understand why we would need an amount. Maybe it's not always 400,000, but that much carried over every year. Why that's different than what we budget each year?
I would say a couple things. First of all, it's a good question, and it could fall under additional scrutiny. The other thing I would just say is that money right there, a large part of that was carried over in the previous year, okay? And so what happens is this isn't in addition to what was carried over before. If what wasn't carried over last year wasn't spent, then it's there to carry over again. So, I mean, there could be an argument that says, well, if they're carrying over this much every year, do they really need that, okay? And one of the concerns that we've had, particularly with our IT area, is there's a lot of things that need to be done and money needs to be spent on them, but they're so busy working on projects that they haven't been able to get to those. But other than that, we could dive a little deeper in another meeting and actually bring Josh in and talk specifically about it. But we've known that their needs are great, and so traditionally for a number of years we have carried that over, and so that's what it is, and we're trying to just be transparent about it. And if we want to make a decision or dive deeper later, we're happy to do that.
George has a question.
Dustin, this is the carryover from the 16-17 budget to the 17-18 budget.
correct, yes. So it's affecting the current fiscal year.
And the whole purpose of having this is exactly for your question. As a council, we need to know when this amount of money is being carried over. And for example, in IS, right now, the energy department isn't getting the IS services they need. And I looked at the employment needs. It's pretty obvious why they're not getting the service. At least that's my impression from the energy board. So I would like to, this is extremely helpful for me, Gary, don't you think? Because that very issue came up in our last budget, in our last energy board meeting. So, but the whole purpose of this is for us as a council to review what's being carried over. Is it necessary? Is it reasonable? And if it's not, we should make a difference in the budget the next year. And does Elizabeth have a copy of this?
Yeah, the council has a copy of this. I have a physical copy if you want a physical copy.
Okay, I need a hard copy.
I thought you might want one, George.
So we'll make sure you all get a copy of this.
Do you want me to pass around a hard copy or electronic?
Dustin, how much money? What's the sum total at the bottom?
The sum total of all general fund carryovers.
Yep. And what went back into the general fund?
So I didn't add up actually the total amount carried over across the general fund, and I could do that quickly if the council's interested. But what I did include further down right there, Kelsey, on line 117, is the amount of excess budget not included in the carryovers. So On top of all of these carryovers, $216,000 will be added to the general fund's bottom line.
Okay.
So there is still some being left to add to the general fund because of operational savings.
But it's suggestive of there's that total will be millions.
Yes, yeah,
and
probably
200,000 to the general fund balance.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm probably more than $2 million.
Okay.
So that 216,000 that is going to the general fund is also at the same time being added to the employee recognition?
Yes, so in the budget ordinance, the budget resolution, what we do is any operational savings minus these carryovers, we split it. Half of it goes to an employee recognition fund, which has been used for Provo 360 recognition, among other recognitions for incentive programs at the mayor's discretion, and the other half is given to the general fund's bottom line. If you want, we can go back to the police and discuss some of the items that they've requested in there. The police has again, a sizable carryover list. This largely comes from operational savings in their payroll. And these are the types of, these projects are what they plan to spend that money on. Sometimes that changes slightly due, a more pressing need arises and they'll use that money for those purposes. But at the moment, some of these things have already been crossed off the list, and others aren't. Urban Deer is an ongoing funding that we appropriated original money before. We're carrying it over. These increasing starting pay, that's something that Chief Ferguson mentioned, that he's planning on using some of that payroll savings to address some of his compensation requests. And so that's something that we're planning on accommodating through this carryover process. Ultimately, what that will do is, if he uses more of his payroll, there will be less to carry over next year. So this number could potentially drop depending on how they utilize those payroll savings. The streets, that's where I mentioned they had an open PO for equipment, but they also have a contingency fund for those types of repairs. Economic development, all of these are related to specific initiatives that have existed in the past, and economic development is kind of the holder for each of those, with the exception of professional services, which is what provides their ability to do consulting for a variety of programs. General services is the citywide program. That Provo 360 amount is the net of what's left of the original appropriation of Provo 360 projects. The Nature Conservancy grant, we carried over some excess savings related to I believe it was the jail property purchase, or maybe it was the KOA. I can't remember which one which, but there was a little bit of savings there, so we're carrying it over to use for the fire station design work. There was also some other SIRE and a tuition reimbursement program. That money came from those types of employee recognition. Yes?
So, Nature Conservancy, I attend the Agricultural Commission.
Yes.
And I don't know where it shows up on the books, but they're saying like they have 25,000.
This is that $25,000. It's a grant, and so what we do is when we spend money out of it, we'll spend it out of this area and carry over balances on an ongoing basis.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
Yep. That tuition reimbursement program is a citywide program started last fiscal year. And like I mentioned, it came from those employee recognition funds, that money that gets added, split with the general fund. We allocated a portion of that to go specifically towards employee or tuition reimbursement, excuse me. The building maintenance fund is the general fund's capital replacement, infrastructure investment fund that we're carrying over. That's the remaining balance of the amount. I believe it's $395,000 is what we appropriated originally, and we used only a small portion of it. So we'll carry that over to this fiscal year and spend it down as needed.
Question before you pass it by. Economic development, downtown Provo Inc., how come we would have a carryover there? Did we cut it back what we were going to contribute in the budget cycle, or that's strange?
A lot of these things are things that are in process at the end of the fiscal year. So if they didn't file their quarterly report on time, we would carry that over until they filed their quarterly report.
Correct. Question.
I'm learning a whole lot here. I appreciate your patience with me and my questions. It seems that there's times where these lines are, this is how much was budgeted for this area, and we didn't spend it, so we're carrying it over. And other times it sounds like it's, well, the department had some money left over, and we're planning to use it for this in the coming year. Which is it, or is it sometimes one and sometimes the other?
It varies by item. So, like the downtown storefront, branding, downtown economic enhancement, each of those are, we had a large chunk of money that we're kind of spending down and carrying over the amounts as we spend it down. We could perhaps do a better job labeling which are which. I think they all functionally are the same, but the purpose behind them is different.
Could you have two columns, maybe, like Wayne says, these are really spent, and just having money just hasn't been processed yet. It'd be nice.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could do easily. I think split it between those types of things. These are prior obligations that we're kind of carrying over for financial reasons versus these are initiatives the departments are pursuing because of operational savings.
Sometimes it might be adjustment, but this would be helpful for us, I think, to have it in separate columns.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that for you.
By happy to do that for us, is that meaning you'll come back in a few weeks, or is that like next year when you do this presentation, you'll have a different format?
I don't know. I think if the council really wants it for this year, I think we can do it. I think it's up to you. My preference would be I'd be happy to accommodate that next year. But if the council wants a further breakdown of this carryover, I'd be happy to do that as well.
When a department requests carryover, it again can be for a variety of reasons. It'd be easier for us to have them categorize that with their request as opposed to going back postmortem and doing it now. But particularly that most of this money is probably already spent, and so again, it would be nice if we could do that next year. If it would be helpful to you in your budgeting process this year, we'd be glad to try to reconstruct that. But it'd be easiest for us if we were to do it in the future.
Okay.
And again, if you have specific questions in the report, we'd be happy to respond to those.
Yeah,
So if you want to take it with you and look at it and drop me an email or let Dustin know, we'd be happy to reply on specifics for this year.
Further down in lines.
One more question.
Yes.
Just a thought. I'm as well happy to have it, happy to wait until next year for it, but I'm curious if there's any way we can kind of denote this request so we don't forget about it.
We can include it in the budget resolution. I mean, we did include that we would review it, and we could include that we would review it by category or something in the budget resolution. Or
I don't want to make this difficult, but there are times where I forget. Things drop through the cracks with me, and so I would like to.
I won't forget.
You won't forget? Okay.
And could we get it early in the year?
Yeah, I think we had this list completed a little while ago. We could do it sooner. One trick is that our audit isn't. We're actually still working on the CAFR for the city right now as we speak. We're in the very final stages of fine tuning, correcting minor issues. But occasionally there are things that we find in the audit that affect our ability to carry over. So they might change if we did it too soon. Yes. Okay. So.
I think probably. September is probably the earliest. October would probably be ideal, but we could do it as early as September.
Yeah. And that's not to say that we couldn't make further changes and then redisclose those additional changes at a later date as well. So
question. So we've asked for basically two categories, those things that are ongoing in a budget that is a project that's ongoing, and then those that because there's extra money, this is where we'd like to spend it. Right. But it sounded like some of these may, like the Downtown Inc., disappear if it really has been spent already.
Yeah, in my mind, there are those kind of three categories, right? There's original appropriations that would disappear over time. There's current financial obligations, right? We're purchasing something that the transaction is not yet complete, and that requires us to carry it over between years. And then that's this kind of operational savings, satisfying those operational needs of those three categories that I kind of would separate. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think it's something that we could work on together that, as we propose it to you and you see it and you would like further changes, we can continue to work on it. I think all of it is a work in progress as we go through. So,
I don't know how reasonable it is, but one fourth maybe, that the fourth thing that would be interesting is, particularly for the ones where you have operational savings, where did that operational savings come from? So it's almost like an in and the others are outs.
Yeah, so I do track that on my side because I have to verify that they actually have this money. You know, if a department asks for $1 million, and I have to go in and find, okay, which accounts do they have the money in? And so sometimes that's a little difficult because they want to use these 20 different accounts that have $100 in it each to spend in this one thing. And so I do that tracking. So that's not without issue. It does make it a little more complicated, and I don't know how interested you are in our account numbers, but I could provide the major source when it's clear. It would be relatively easy for me to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. I don't know if you want me to continue going through, but the rest of this is pretty simple. The RDA has carryovers for major projects. There's a vehicle purchase and sanitation, some minor carryovers in the Justice Court. The library does have a large department carryover. They use that for a variety of purposes. They've already used it sometime in this year for part of the construction of their AV lab that's not already covered by the RAP tax funds. There's some other system purchases that they include. The computer bank is an amount that carries over, the idea being that departments fund their own computer replacement schedule using their own dollars. And so they transfer money to the computer bank and we just roll the balances forward. There are some that have overspent their accounts and they're actually accruing negative interest through that. We allocate interest based on what they're saving through that. Employee benefits is some procedural changes, and fleet has some carryovers related to a variety of their vehicle purchases. But if there are no further questions in this meeting, I'd be happy to answer any ones that the council has, or if you email me if you have questions.
And hopefully you didn't just explain this while I was talking, but the fire, is that for their new engine? Is that just saving for the new engine?
We appropriated, there's actually 2 phases to that project, and so that's $1 million of the, I believe it's the next apparatus that they do it through, because there's a long lead time in the construction, and so they're doing the first phase of that construction and then they would do the next one later. So I think that one's the largest one of the vehicle carryovers. The other ones are just minor amounts that the departments either underspent or didn't purchase a vehicle that they were planning on, and then they have a future need that they will use it for. So.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Cliff, what's our time frame here? We're needing to go into a closed meeting.
So we have a presentation on the neighborhood program. That's the last item before you consider a motion to close the meeting.
And we'd have 15 minutes, and it's scheduled for 15, so we're on track?
We're on track.
Great. We will turn item 7 over to Cliff, a discussion on proposed neighborhood program changes.
Okay. So Council, the purpose of this presentation is just to give you an update on what the Neighborhood Program Review Committee's been working on and discussing with the neighborhood program chairs. This slide represents the existing Neighborhood Advisory Board, its current membership, and its duty. The actual neighborhood chairs do much more than that, but in our ordinance, that's all that they're required to do as an advisory board. So we've been doing a lot of talking about how to revamp the program, give the advisory board, or the advisory board, which we'll talk about, changing it to a committee, but to give that body more to do and more responsibilities. The first thing we suggest doing is changing the ordinance chapter title from advisory board to neighborhood program, and the reason being is actually the third bullet, is that we want to transform it into a council committee. And then one of the things to recognize is that the downtown neighborhood's no longer going to be represented by Downtown Provo Inc., but rather an actual resident of the downtown neighborhood. There are over 700 residential addresses there. They're continuing to grow. We're getting more and more. And DPI is quite happy to continue working and liaising, but as far as representing residents, it's not their interest. They want to represent business. And we did some checking with some of the residents out there, and they want to have their own representative. So the Neighborhood Advisory Committee is what we're recommending. It would be a council committee comprised of up to 9 members. Primarily, the majority of the membership would be the 5 area representatives that are selected by the chairs in the respective areas, kind of like what the NAB is now. We foresee having another 4 members comprised of at least 1 council member and up to 3 former neighborhood chairs or vice chairs. And the idea being with the latter part is to try and bring in some expertise from people who have been in the program perhaps for a long time and may have a different perspective than someone that's in the trenches right now as a neighborhood chair or vice chair. One of the other distinctions that we looked at for this was the current ordinance only allows neighborhood chairs, and we went through a long period in one area where we couldn't find a chair that was willing to do it, but our ordinance wouldn't let us put a vice chair in. So part of the legal change that we'd make in the ordinance is to allow a vice chair to be a member of the advisory committee or an area rep with the acknowledgement or the support of their current chair. And then we also looked at expanding the duties to provide more support for the neighborhood program, to provide more advice to council on how they see it working, and also to have a stronger role in the training of other participants in the program. So the review process so far is we've been meeting as a committee, and we've met with the advisory board members. Currently on Open City Hall, we have these draft changes out for circulation with the neighborhood chairs and vice chairs until November 29th. Right now, we've got 14 people I think have looked at it, and we've had 6 comments from 3 current chairs. And then we're also asking council members to put their input in before November 29th. And then I think the 29th or 30th, the review committee is going to meet again to discuss the input, make any final changes before bringing it to council on December 5th at the work and council meetings for your consideration. That's all I have for.
So I just wanted to note that I was an area rep in 94, and so my memory goes forward from that point, but at no point has the Neighborhood Advisory Board, as it is in the code, ever really been a board, because to be a board, it specifies that the mayor appoints the members and that they're a 7-member body.
Right.
And so it never functioned that way because they were elected and it was a 5-member body. And so I like the clarification, and I like the direction that we're going.
Yeah, and one thing that that board has actually been doing for a number of years, it appears that they've just met, a few times a year, get together at a restaurant or somebody's home and have a meeting and discuss various issues, particularly around matching grants and other things that they're interested in. But the last few months, maybe the last 4 or 5 months, I think, we've essentially been meeting with them. We've had a couple council members, the leadership has been there participating, and we've actually opened it up, that meeting, to other non-area reps. And so we've had, I think the first time we opened it up, we had a total of 14 people show up, and it was a vigorous and enlightening discussion with the various people that were there, and it was good to get different perspectives rather than just a smaller body. So we think overall that expanding it to the reach and the responsibilities of the committee within the neighborhood program will be a benefit to the program overall. Questions, Gary? Mr. Winterton?
Yes, I was wondering about the Downtown Provo Inc. I know that he does not want to have to deal with, he wants to focus on businesses, and I get that. Right. But he also wants to have the opportunity to take advantage of the grants. There was some talk at one time as having a representative from Downtown Provo Inc. be a vice chair. so that they could make sure they were aware of everything that was, every opportunity that they could use for grants or whatever they wanted to be involved with that.
Yeah, I think my recollection was that originally that was kind of the idea, and I think he's backed off a little bit from that. But he could certainly work with any neighborhood chair to put forward a project that would be beneficial to a particular area, whether it's downtown or any other of the business areas within the other neighborhoods.
And the other question that I'd have would be, are the neighborhood chairs representing the businesses in their areas? I think that it's important that we recognize that, yeah, we have neighborhood chairs and we have business, and they are part of our neighborhood. And I do get concerned at times that sometimes we forget that businesses are part of our neighborhood.
Yeah, I would say that from what I've observed, some do it better than others. Some probably do it none at all. But I think that's an area where we can work with the chairs with training and some just reminders.
And do we believe in that? Do we believe that as a council and as a city that they are part of the neighborhood? And I don't want to exclude them personally, but I think that we need to determine some of those things.
Well, that's why we previously have added the position as a business liaison vice chair. That's an open possibility for any neighborhood, not just the downtown neighborhood. And for, you might think the surrounding neighborhoods would be good candidates. And if there are businesses within the Dixon or any neighborhood that feel strongly like, hey, I'm going to the meetings, I want to be part of this, just say, hey, I want to fill that position, because it's up to the businesses to nominate, and if that's just one person that's involved, then they can nominate themselves, I suppose, but they can take a step up and say, I am here, and that's a position that I want to fill, and be a representative and be able to interact with the other vice chairs and with the chair. So really the burden is on the businesses to step up to what we have provided for them, rather than the neighborhood chair to reach out. Now, I wouldn't say the neighborhood chair should avoid it. I mean, when you were Dave Harding, when he was in that position, certainly interacted with businesses, and we would recommend that happen. But there's no barrier here. It's an open opportunity for the businesses to step up and be involved.
If you want to respond, I've got another
No,
topic.
I would echo what he just said.
Okay. I love the proposal about the area reps and changing the structure of that. I very much support that. I am uncomfortable or unsettled, which is probably a better word. I'm unsettled with the proposal about changing the downtown representation. I do think that downtown, even with the addition of residents, I do think it is an exceptional neighborhood. I think it has different characteristics than every other one. I have spoken with, I believe, the chair of the Neighborhood Program Review Committee, and expressed some of these thoughts. And it's not a proposal that this is how I think it should be done. It's just here are some things that I'm concerned about. I would welcome the opportunity to speak as the representative as the council representative that covers the downtown area. I would appreciate an opportunity maybe to talk to the rest of the committee, maybe explore some things with other stakeholders. I worry that December 5th may be a little quick to decide this. Again, the other board / committee, I think, I'm very comfortable with that, but I guess I'm almost asking for more time on the downtown representation question.
Well, we've been exploring that particular question, Mr. Harding, since about June. And you may recall, actually, last winter we talked about folding up the residential part of the downtown neighborhood and folded it into the 4 surrounding neighborhoods. And as we talked to the different chairs and we talked to the people in the in the neighborhoods or in the downtown area, it was felt that the residents in that are a unique subset of the city, and that they would be better represented within their own neighborhood as the downtown residential neighborhood, if you will.
So it was like Monday morning that we accidentally met and we talked about this. So this is a recent conversation. And Dave had some concerns. Right now is probably not the time to get into them because it would take way more time. But we can discuss this more. And in fact, maybe you and me and I don't know when our next committee meeting is.
I've got it written down, but it's around the 29th or 30th. The other thing I intend to do is to reach out to the commenters on Open City Hall for this within the neighborhood group, and where they've got concerns. I mean, if they've got statements of support, then I don't think we need to address it. But if they've got some concerns or questions about how it would work and things like that, we'll reach out and try and have that information before the committee meets again at the end of the month.
So just in a nutshell, what I heard the other day is that the downtown has always been the downtown, a business district, and now we're introducing a new and potentially conflicting use with residential, and that that can create conflicts where the residents would say, hey, I want to go to sleep and you're running a concert late at night or something else, and all of a sudden you have this conflict.
Yeah.
So we'll delve into that more.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Sewell?
So the next meeting of the Neighborhood Review Committee is Wednesday, November 29th at 5 o'clock. Would you be interested in coming to that, Mr. Harding?
Absolutely, and I apologize that I wasn't aware that these discussions were going on since July. I would have enjoyed.
Yeah, no worries. We appreciate the input, and can I just say, while I've got the floor for a minute, that we're extremely, from the staff perspective, and I know the council members that have talked about it, I think we're very, very pleased with the contributions of our neighborhood chairs and vice chairs, and particularly our area reps who've put a lot of extra time in trying to make the program better, and I just want to acknowledge them because they put a lot of themselves into the work they do for the city.
What was the time
Dixon
of that?
had something that he wanted.
November 29th, Wednesday at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Right
I should be able to make that.
Okay, great.
Dixon, do you have something about this?
Just on that neighborhood thing, that conflict probably also exists, though, when a neighborhood is predominantly residential and there's some commercial people in it, commercial users. I think of, the Mix or, Riverwoods or some of these. I don't know how that's handled, but just there's the opposite but equal challenge in those neighborhoods that have those commercial segments.
That's a good point. So we're right about on time here if we're done.
I'm done unless you have any more questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So next we need a motion to go into a closed meeting. Brian?
And that would be appropriate at this time. There are, as I understand it, 2 topics to discuss, one involving litigation or current or imminent litigation, and the other involving purchase of property.
Okay. Looking for a motion? Okay. Kay made the motion. A second? Oop, Gary? Gary Winterton. All in favor? Votes unanimous.